Welcome, you've just stepped into a quiet place, a temple made not of stone, but of stillness. This is the empty boat here. We do not rush. We do not chase answers. We sit beside the river of stories, and we listen to the silence between. Words dot in the world outside. Your name matters, your titles, your deadlines, your questions. But here you are not your fear. You are not your past. You are not the storm. You are the sky. In this floating vessel of stories, we will drift through fog and fire, memory and myth. You'll meet a monk who forgets his name, a teacup that sings before it breaks, a garden that changes shape each morning. These are not just tales. They are mirrors. They are medicine. Each story is a doorway. Each breath is a bridge. And if you stay long enough, still enough, you might just remember what the world made you forget. So take a deep breath with me now, in and out. Let the boat go. Let the water carry you. You are safe here. You are welcome. Let us begin. Story 1. The monk who forgot his name. There was once a mountain wrapped in mist, its paths carpeted with pine needles, and its silence deeper than sleep. At the very top stood an ancient monastery, where time moved like water slow, patient, and unseen. The monks who lived there spoke little, walked mindfully, and bowed to both joy and suffering with equal grace. Among them was a young monk, barely 30, named Junsi. He was known not for his eloquence, but for his discipline. Remembered every verse of scripture, every ritual gesture, every teaching his master whispered under candlelight. His robes were never wrinkled, his chants never faltered. He was, as the old abbot said, sharp as a blade and just as rigid. But one autumn morning, everything changed. Junsei awoke early, as always, to the sound of the temple bell. He folded his mat, washed his face, and walked out to greet the rising sun. But as he passed the other monks, bowing politely, they stared at him with curious expressions. When he sat at his place in the zendo, his cushion was missing. When he joined the morning chant, the master paused and asked, "Young man, who are you?" Junsei opened his mouth to speak, but no name came. He blinked. He tried again. His throat tightened. I am. But the words evaporated. He looked to his robes, to the beads at his wrist, to the calluses on his palms. Nothing helped. He stood up, heart pounding, and stumbled outside. The pine trees were whispering, but he could not understand their language. The gravel beneath his feet felt unfamiliar. Even his breath steady, trained felt borrowed. He had forgotten his name, and with it, he had forgotten who he was. At first, the monks assumed illness. The herbalist gave him tea. The healer checked his pulse. The abbot smiled gently and said, "Perhaps this forgetting is not a curse, but a beginning." Junsi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wanted to remember. Not just his name, but the man who had worn it, the devoted student, the disciplined practitioner, the son of a merchant. The boy who had arrived at this monastery 10 years ago with a hunger for purity. But now he was only presence, a body, a breath. "Should I return home?" he asked the abbot. The old man chuckled. "Where is home if you don't know who you are?" So Junsei stayed. But his life changed. He was no longer asked to recite sutras, no longer praised for his precision. Instead, he swept leaves, he stirred porridge, he carried water from the stream. He was not Junsi, the monk. He was simply the one who was there doing. And something strange happened. He began to notice. the way steam curled from a hot bowl in the morning light, the way a drop of water clung to the rim of a bamboo cup before letting go, the way an old monk's eyelids fluttered slightly when meditating half-sleep, half-awake. Without a name, he was not performing anymore. Was being. One night, as rain tapped gently on the roof, the abbot came to him, still no name. He asked Junse. I shook his head. I don't even know if I want it back. The abbot smiled. Then let me tell you a story. And he began. A man once fell into a river and clung desperately to a log. The current was strong, and he feared he would be swept away. He held on tighter and tighter. But eventually, he realized the log was stuck hard, the river was flowing. Without him, to move forward, he had to let go. The name, the log, the self-it, is all the same. Junse listened. His hands, once so eager to grasp, now rested open on his knees. I think, he whispered, I'm beginning to float. Weeks passed, then months. No one asked again for his name. He was simply the one who smiles at clouds, the one who hums while cleaning, the one who listens before speaking. The monastery became a living poem, and he was a syllable soft, necessary, and fluid. One evening, during the winter solstice ceremony, each monk was to place a candle on the altar and speak his name aloud. It was a tradition of renewal, a way of affirming presence in the community. When it was his turn, he stepped forward. He took the candle, lit it from the sacred flame, and when the moment came, he said nothing, only bowed. The room was still. The abbot rose slowly and joined him. He has remembered something greater than a name, he said. He has remembered how to be did, and so they let him be. Philosophical reflection in Zen, the question, who are you, is not answered with titles or memories. It is met with silence, with breath, with tea being poured into a cup and wind stirring a bamboo chime. We cling to names because we fear dissolution. We fear becoming no one. But what if being no one is the path to becoming whole? Junse's forgetting was not a loss, it was a release. Without his fixed identity, he could finally dissolve into the present moment, not to perform enlightenment, but to live it quietly, gently, like mist on water. The ego clings, the heart surrenders, and in surrender we remember, not a name but a truth. Psychological reflection. Modern life feeds us identities. We are told who we should be: successful, attractive, efficient, happy. We hold on to names: mother, manager, victim, warrior, failure, and with those names come expectations, judgments, fears. But when those names fall away by accident, crisis, or choice, many panic. Who am I without my achievements, without my trauma, without my story? The answer is not in more labels. It is in presence. When we forget the self, we find the self, that quiet, unwavering awareness behind the noise. Psychologically, this is the beginning of healing, dissolving the fixed narrative, allowing stillness, witnessing thoughts without believing them. As Junse discovered, forgetting the self is not disorientation, it is liberation. Closing meditation tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, who would I be without my name, without my past, without the labels others gave me? Just for one breath can I rest in that space. Let go of the log dot, let the river take you. You are not lost, you are simply floating. Let the words of the Buddha guide you. All things are not self. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. Dhammapada 279, Now close your eyes, breathe. And remember, you don't need to know who you are to know that you are. Story 2. The Cup That Spilled Itself. The rain had been falling for days, soft at first, like whispered apologies, then heavier, like grief that had waited too long to be felt. The mountains were soaked in mist, trees bowed, the earth was quiet, and inside the small meditation hall nestled deep in the valley, the fire flickered low in this remote monastery less known than revered by wandering seekers lived an old nun named Sori. She was neither famous nor particularly eloquent, but her presence was known by all, like the way you notice warmth without needing to name it, like the way you remember silence when the noise ends. She did not speak unless necessary, and when she did, her voice carried like still water, slow, deep, and impossible to forget. It was said that when she was younger, she had studied under 7 masters, left 6, and forgot the name of the 7th, that she had once given away. All her robes but one, and when a beggar asked for that, she simply stepped into the snow bare-skinned and bowed. She owned almost nothing, except for one item, a simple clay teacup. It was uneven, slightly chipped at the lip, glazed in a dull, earthy tone. Most would have discarded it, but for decades, Sori had used this cup every day. She washed it gently after each use. She kept it on a small stone shelf by the window, where the light could touch it in the morning. No one ever dared move it until one evening. During retreat season, a young novice from the city named Mina was assigned to clean Sori's room. Mina was new to the monastery. Her hands were always busy, her mind even busier. She had come not for peace, but for answers. She had been a journalist in another life, until her own mind turned against her insomnia, panic, a divorce she never saw coming. In the stillness of the mountain, she hoped to reclaim some part of herself that hadn't shattered, but silence made her anxious. Stillness frightened her, and when she entered Sori's room, the scent of sandalwood and old paper felt almost unbearable. There was nothing to clean, nothing out of place, except for that old teacup on the shelf. It looked dusty. Maybe she should rinse it, just to be helpful. She reached for it, her fingers jittery from the cold, misjudged the grip. The cup slipped and shattered, a sharp crack like thunder inside the quiet. Mina froze, her heart pounded. She stared at the shards scattered across the totomi mat, her mouth opened in horror. And before she could move, Sori was at the door. The old nun said nothing. She walked in, slowly, and knelt beside the pieces. Mina fell to her knees, bowing low. "I'm so sorry, Master Sori. I didn't mean to." It just Sori raised a hand, not in anger, but in stillness. Then she said, "The cup has spilled itself." Mina blinked. "What?" "The cup," Sori repeated, her eyes soft, "has spilled itself." And then, as if nothing had happened, she stood, turned, and left the room. That night, Mina could not sleep. She lay on her futon, turning those words over and over. What did it mean? How could the cup spill itself? She had dropped it. It was her fault. She felt terrible. Guilt knotted in her stomach. She replayed the moment endlessly, as if penance could rewind time at dawn. She went to find Sori. The nun was in the garden, pruning lavender in the fog. Mina bowed deeply. "I can't stop thinking about what happened," she confessed. "I broke your cup. I ruined something precious. And yet, you said the cup spilled itself. I don't understand." Sori looked at her, kind of gaze that did not search for answers, but waited for your heart to soften. The cup, she said, had lived many years. It was cracked. The glaze was thinning. It had weathered fire, ice, and time. It could not remain forever. It only needed a moment, a hand, a chance to return to the earth. But I caused it, Mina insisted. I was careless. Sorry touched the air gently, as if smoothing invisible wrinkles. Sometimes, she said, we believe we are the center of every storm, that our hands move the stars, that every broken thing is our fault. But not all endings are punishments. Some are simply ripenings. The fruit falls not because we shook the branch, but because it was ready. Mina felt her throat tighten. Sora continued, you did not break the cup. The cup fulfilled its nature. You were the witness. In the days that followed, Mina began to watch the world differently. She noticed how leaves let go of branches without asking permission, how snow melted into soil, leaving no trace of its former form, how the birds did not mourn their songs once sung. Something inside her began to shift. She had spent her life clutching guilt, thinking that every loss, every failure, every collapse was because she had done something wrong. The failed marriage, her mother's illness, her friend's silence, even the death of her dog, she had carried it all. But now she wondered, what if some things break not because we are wrong, but because they are done? What if letting go isn't abandonment, but grace? What if the world unravels not to punish, but to reveal? 1 week later, she passed Sorry by the stream. The old nun was sipping from a new cup similar in shape, but different in hue. Mina bowed and said, that cup, it's beautiful. Sorry smiled. This one will break too, one day. Mina smiled back. Then I'll try to witness it well. Philosophical reflection in Zen. Everything is impermanent. The cup, the story, the self. We cling not to things but to our belief in their permanence. We believe we own moments, that they are ours, to keep. And when they pass, we feel robbed, betrayed, guilty. But to live with presence is to live with open hands. The cup spilling is not a tragedy. It is the natural breath of existence. What rises, falls. What forms, dissolves. The mistake is not in dropping the cup. It is in believing it could last forever. And perhaps more subtly it is in believing that we caused the loss, rather than witnessing its arrival. In the words of the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The cup was never just a cup. It was clay, fire, time, attention, light, and now it is something else, psychological, reflection. We carry guilt like a stone in the chest, especially for the things we couldn't control. When something ends, a relationship, a chapter, a dream, we replay the story, seeking our fault. We seek control through blame, even when that blame is ourselves. But healing begins when we realize not all endings are ours to prevent. Some things fall apart not because we are broken, but because they are finished. In therapy, this is called reframing. In Zen, it is called awakening. The guilt becomes lighter when we see the impermanence behind the pain. When we stop clenching the shards and allow ourselves to witness, to breathe, to forgive, not only others, but ourselves. Closing meditation tonight, as you hold your cup of tea or water before bed, ask yourself, what am I still blaming myself for? What brokenness am I still calling mine? And can I just for one moment see it differently? Not as failure, but as fulfillment. Repeat softly in your mind, the cup has spilled itself. and let yourself be free. Let the past fall from your fingers like cooled clay. Let silence mend the place where guilt once lived, as the Buddha once taught. Drop by drop, the water pot is filled. So the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good. One breath, one forgiveness, one moment of stillness at a time. Now rest, and let the next story find you. Story 3. Under the mango tree, she waited. Asterisk, asterisk, in a quiet village nestled between two rivers, there stood a mango tree older than memory, its roots twisted into the earth like ancient script, its branches heavy with shade. The villagers believed it had once been planted by a wandering monk who whispered blessings into the soil. Whether true or not, something sacred seemed to rest in its presence each summer. When the fruit ripened and the cicadas began their long songs, the tree offered shade to old men with cracked sandals, children chasing dust, monks from distant temples seeking pause, and among them, year after year, was one woman who always returned. Her name was Anaya. She was neither young nor old, neither radiant nor plain. She moved with the silence of someone who had cried alone for many years and now carried her sorrow like a folded letter close, but unread. No one quite knew her story. She arrived each year just as the rains ended, always alone, always at dawn, and sat beneath the mango tree. She never picked the fruit. She never prayed aloud. She simply waited. One villager, an old potter named Rahil, once asked her gently, "Are you waiting for someone?" She smiled, a soft, distant curve of the lips. "Yes," she said, "but I no longer remember who." It had begun many seasons ago, when Anaya was young and hopeful, and the world still seemed like something one could hold. She had fallen in love with a man who promised to return, a traveler, a student of Dharma, whose voice was calm and eyes steady. He had told her he would go away to a mountain monastery for 3 years to learn, to grow, to prepare for a life with her. He had touched her hand beneath the mango tree and said, "Wait for me." And she had, for 3 years, she waited with joy. She read his letters, lit candles for his health, wore the scarf he left behind like a second skin. Then the letters stopped. Year 4 passed. Year 5 melted into a blur of questions. People said he had died. Others whispered he had chosen the path of renunciation. Some believed he had simply forgotten. Anaya didn't know what to believe. She only knew that something inside her could not close the door, so she kept returning to the mango tree. Not every day, but every year, always. In summer, not to beg the universe for answers, not to cling to hope, but simply to sit. To wait not for a person, but for stillness. On her 12th year under the mango tree, a traveling monk passed through the village. He had walked for months, carrying only a bowl and a smile. When he saw Anaya beneath the tree, he bowed. "May I sit?" he asked. She nodded, and the two sat in silence, side by side, like stone and shadow. After a time, he asked, "Are you meditating?" Anaya looked at him. "I'm not sure. Are you waiting?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'm just remembering how to be." The monk smiled. "Then you are practicing well." They watched a mango fall. It landed softly in the grass. Monk picked it up, held it gently, then placed it in Anaya's lap. "For the one who waits without asking," he said, "the fruit ripens on its own." He bowed again and left. That night, Anaya dreamed of him, not the monk, the man she had once loved. She dreamed he was sitting beside her, older now, weathered by time. He did not speak. He did not explain. He only looked at her with the same calm gaze he had held years ago. She did not feel anger. She did not feel loss. Only an immense silent gratitude that he had once existed, that she had once loved, that she had once waited long enough to meet. Herself, she awoke with tears on her cheeks. Not from sorrow, from something softer, something like peace years past. The mango tree kept growing, and Anaya kept coming. But something had changed. She no longer waited for anyone to arrive. She no longer searched the faces of travelers instead. She came to listen, to the wind in the leaves, to the stillness between birdsong, the breath moving through her, ribs like tide and retreat. People began to join her. Not many, but enough. Sometimes an old woman mourning a child, sometimes a boy who could not speak, sometimes a man with a past he had never forgiven. They sat with Anaya beneath the mango tree, in the presence of something they could not name. They did not speak often, but when they rose to leave, their shoulders seemed lighter, their eyes less full of search. One day, a little girl asked her, "Why do you sit here every year?" Anaya smiled, "Because the tree remembers." The girl looked confused. Remembers what? Anaya looked up at the branches, now full of golden fruit. It remembers that healing takes time, that waiting is not weakness, that not all seeds are meant to bloom quickly. Some take years beneath the soil before they even think of sprouting. The girl nodded, though she didn't understand. But one day she would. Philosophical reflection in Zen. Patience is not passive. It is presence to wait, without clinging, to endure without expectation, to remain rooted when every part of you longs to flee, is the practice. Anaya's story is not one of romance or heartbreak. It is the story of one who transformed waiting into awakening. She began with longing, but she stayed long enough to let longing soften into listening, and that listening opened the door to presence to wait like the tree waits, to love without grasping, to sit without demanding. In the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha says, "Thus shall you think of all this fleeting world. Star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, a dream." Anaya did not lose love. She found stillness, and stillness is the root of all true love. Psychological reflection in the modern mind. Waiting is unbearable. We are trained to chase closure, to seek answers, to resolve grief like a math problem. But some wounds are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be held. Anaya's story reflects a deep psychological truth. Healing cannot be rushed. When we wait with expectation, we suffer. When we wait with openness, we grow. We may never receive the apology we deserved, the explanation we crave, the reunion we imagined, but in the act of waiting mindfully, we meet ourselves. Patience becomes presence, grief becomes gratitude, and silence becomes sanctuary. Closing meditation tonight. Find a quiet place to sit. Place your hands gently in your lap. Close your eyes and ask, what am I still waiting for? Whom am I still hoping will return? Can I just for this moment release the story? Not to forget, but to rest. Repeat to yourself, I do not need to know what happened to be whole. Let that be your mango tree. Let that be your healing. The Buddha once said, with mindfulness, strive on. Do not be careless. Live each moment as if it were your last. Not because the end is near, but because now is all we ever have. And sometimes, sitting beneath a tree is not waiting, it is returning. Story 4. The Master Who Swept Leaves at Midnight. The temple of Shinzan was hidden deep within a cedar forest, where fog wove its way through the branches like silk through fingers. It was the kind of place where time moved so slowly that you forgot it existed, and footsteps fell softer than breath. There were no gates, no signs, no maps, only a narrow path of moss-covered stones and the distant sound of wind chimes, echoing like forgotten lullabies. Few monks remained there. The world had grown louder, and even temples were not spared the thinning of silence. But those who stayed at Shinsen did so not out of duty, but because they had nowhere else to go, perhaps. Nowhere else worth going. At the center of the temple grounds stood an ancient courtyard, where autumn leaves gathered like memories, crimson, gold, and umber. They fell each day without fail, like gentle reminders that even beauty must decay, and every night without fail they were gone by morning, not blown away by wind, not swept by any novice, but by the Master himself. Master TETSU. 80-3 years old, bent like an old willow, eyes like weathered stone, and every midnight, while others slept, he swept the leaves, the courtyard. The silence, no one ever saw him begin. No one ever heard his steps. Only the sound of the broom brushing stone, soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat, made of wood and wind. Some said he was mad. Others said he was enlightened. Most simply accepted him, as one accepts moonlight on water. One evening, a young man arrived at the temple. His name was Haru, and he did not come to seek wisdom. He came to escape. His life in the city had imploded. Career, relationship, meaning, all lost. Like sand through open hands. He was not looking for religion or peace or philosophy. He was looking for a place to disappear. They gave him a mat and a robe. No questions. The first few days, he wandered the temple grounds in a haze. He watched the sun rise, but felt no warmth. He listened to the chants, but heard no music. He ate rice and miso, and tasted only ash. And then, one morning, he noticed the courtyard clean, clear, perfectly swept. He looked up at the towering cedar trees. Their leaves fell constantly, and yet, by morning, not a single one remained. He asked, "A passing monk who cleans the courtyard?" The monk smiled. The Master Haru frowned. But when, after the world sleeps, Haru stayed awake that night, curiosity, perhaps, or just the ache of a mind that could not settle. At midnight, he crept to the edge of the courtyard, and there he was. Master Tetsu, small, silent, broom in hand, sweeping, not hurriedly, but with exquisite care, as if each leaf mattered, as if each stroke of the broom was a prayer. Haru watched for over an hour. The old man never stopped, never looked up, never sighed, only swept under the stars, under the moon, under the weight of years. The next morning, Haru approached him. "Master," he said, "why do you sweep at midnight?" The old monk looked up, eyes glinting like morning dew. "Because that is when the world forgets itself." Haru blinked. "I don't understand." Master Tetsu smiled faintly. "During the day, people watch. They comment. They admire. They judge. But at night, only the leaves remain, and the task becomes real." Haru began watching him nightly, at first from a distance. Then, one night, he brought his own broom. The master said nothing, only nodded once, and they swept together. Haru did not speak. He feared words would break the spell. Night after night, he joined, and something began to shift. Not in the world, but in him. The sweeping was simple, yet it awakened something he had forgotten, the feel of breath moving without rush, the sound of bristles against stone, the way effort could be quiet, humble, free of praise. He no longer needed the leaves to be gone. He simply enjoyed the act of tending. One night, he asked the master, "Why do the leaves fall so often?" The old man chuckled, to remind us that nothing stays clean for long, and that's not a flaw. It's the rhythm. Another night, he asked, "Don't you get tired?" Master Tetsu replied, "Yes, but I sweep with the tiredness, not against it." On the 40th night, Haru arrived late. The master had already begun. Haru rushed forward, bowing in apology, but the old monk stopped sweeping and looked at him kindly. "You are ready," he said. "For what?" "To stop sweeping." Haru's face fell. "I don't understand." "You no longer need the leaves to vanish," said Tetsu. "You have swept your mind." And with that, the master handed him the broom and walked away. From that night on, Haru swept alone at first. It felt like loss, but then he heard the quiet rhythm, not just of the broom, but of himself, breathing, being, tending, and, for the first time in many years, he wept not from sorrow, but from the simplicity of being useful again, from remembering how to care for a world that would never stay perfect, and didn't need to. Philosophical reflection in Zen: the ordinary is sacred. Sweeping is not about cleanliness. It is about presence, to tend to the world even when no one watches. That is true practice. Not because of reward, not because of image, but because the act itself becomes the meditation. Master Tetsu swept not to erase the leaves, but to be one with their falling. The leaf falls, the broom moves, the hand responds, and the world is whole. In that movement, the Buddha once said, "Your work is to discover your work and then, with all your heart, to give yourself to it." Sweeping becomes that work, not because it changes the world, but because it changes us. Psychological reflection in modern life, we often seek results. We glean to achieve a spotless room. We work to finish tasks. We do, always chasing the done. But this cultivates dissatisfaction, because life is not a list, it is a rhythm. Haru's transformation came not from a teaching, but from a task, from repeating something humble, silently, without needing recognition. In therapy, this is known as behavioral anchoring, when the act itself becomes a way to rewire the nervous system. Mindful repetition calms the anxious mind. The sweeping becomes the breath becomes the bomb, and slowly, identity reforms, not around failure, but care. Closing. Meditation. Imagine yourself with a broom, standing in a quiet courtyard. Leaves are falling. They will never stop, but you do not need them to. You simply sweep not to finish, but to meet yourself in the motion. Repeat softly, "I do not need to complete this. I only need to begin." Let that be your practice. Let that be your peace. As the Buddha once said, just as a flower does not pick and choose the bees that come to it, so too must we tend the garden without attachment. Now rest, and let the next story find you. Story 5. The sound of one step backward. Asterisk, asterisk, the wind had risen early that morning, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and distant rain. On the slope of Mount Keishi, where old bamboo groves leaned into each other like elders exchanging secrets, a young monk named Riku stood at the edge of a narrow cliff path. Below him stretched the valley, a quilt of rice fields silvered by dawn light. Above him, the monastery bell was ringing, not loud, but steady, calling him back. But Riku did not move. He had been walking since before sunrise, fists clenched in his sleeves, thoughts louder than the wind. His face, boyish and tense, carried the storm of 1,000 unsaid things. He had made a mistake, a small one, perhaps by worldly standards. He had forgotten to lock the medicine cabinet after evening rounds. A novice had entered, taken too much of a calming tincture, and fainted during zazen. The boy was fine, but the head monk had scolded Riku sternly in front of the others. "You were careless," the elder said. "Your discipline is weakening." The words struck Riku like stones. He had worked for years to earn trust, to be seen as capable, to silence the voice in his head that always whispered he was not enough. And now one error had unraveled it all. So he walked out, far from the temple walls, not to run, but to breathe, to question. He stood now at the path's edge, the wind tugging at his robes, and stared at the misted valley below. The bell rang again. But he could not return. Not yet. He felt shame curl through his chest like smoke in a sealed room. He had failed again. "Why are you walking so fast, child?" The voice came from behind him, soft, aged, and utterly unhurried. Riku turned. An old man in travel-stained robes stood on the path, leaning slightly on a carved stick. His face was lined with time, but his eyes were as calm as a stone at the bottom of a river. "I'm not going anywhere," Riku replied. The old man chuckled. "Then why are your feet so loud?" Riku frowned. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't," said the man, stepping closer. "But the mountain hears more than your footsteps. It hears the storm in them." Riku looked down, embarrassed. "Made a mistake," he said, "and I don't know how to go back." The old man nodded slowly. "Then don't go forward," he said. "Take one step back." They sat beneath a twisted pine tree. The wind eased. The old man unpacked a small cloth bundle and offered Riku half a rice ball. Riku took it without protest. After some silence, the man asked, "Have you ever heard the story of the archer who aimed too well?" Riku shook his head. "There was once a man," the old monk began, "who trained day and night with his bow. He sought perfection in every shot. One day, he was asked to demonstrate his skill before a great master. The man stood, took aim at a distant target, and struck its center with ease. Then again and again. The onlookers were amazed. But the master only said, 'You shoot like someone who fears missing.'" Riku tilted his head. "Isn't that a good thing?" The old monk smiled. "Fear pollutes the arrow. The truest shot comes from a quiet hand, not one desperate for approval or terrified of error." Riku looked down at his fingers. "I thought discipline would protect me from mistakes." "It doesn't," the old man said. "Discipline prepares the ground, but even the best seed will fall to storms. Mistakes are part of tending the garden. The key is not to walk away from the soil." Riku nodded slowly. "But when I tried to go back, something in me resisted. I felt frozen." The old monk tapped his staff once on the stone. "Because going forward in that state is too heavy, too tangled, too filled with punishment. But a step back, that's where grace lives." They walked together a while as they neared the monastery. Again, the old monk paused by a stream that whispered through mossy rocks. "Have you ever tried walking backward?" he asked. Suddenly, Riku blinked. "On purpose. Try it," the man said. So Riku did. He turned, faced the stream, and took one slow step backward. then another dot. At first, it felt awkward, unnatural. But as he continued, something odd happened. He became more aware. Each movement was careful, each breath more grounded. He could not rely on speed or momentum, only awareness, only presence. When he turned back around, the old man was smiling. Sometimes, he said, the only way forward is through a step back, not to retreat, but to remember how to walk. Riku bowed low. Thank you, Master. But when he rose, the path was empty. The old man had vanished. Only the wind remained, and the sound of one step backward, echoing in his mind. He returned to the monastery as the sun crested the peaks. The courtyard was quiet. The monks were sweeping, chanting, living. Riku bowed at the gate, not as an apology, but as a return. He found the head monk preparing tea. The elder looked up. Mildly surprised, Riku knelt before him. I forgot myself, he said simply. And now, the elder asked. Riku smiled. Now I remember to begin again. The elder nodded and poured him tea. Philosophical reflection in Zen. There is no straight path. Progress is not a line, but a spiral. We revisit old wounds. We stumble on known stones. And often we confuse forward motion with growth. But wisdom knows better. A single step backward, when taken with awareness, can be more transformative than 100 steps ahead made in blindness. Backward step is a return to source, to simplicity, to breath. Master Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen, once said, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things. In forgetting, we remember. In pausing, we arrive. In one step back, we find the ground again. Psychological reflection. Modern psychology often emphasizes forward momentum. Keep going. Push through. Don't look back. But this mentality, when misapplied, leads to burnout, shame, and emotional repression. Sometimes we need to stop, to breathe, to grieve, to return to the beginning, not as a failure, but as a way to reorient. Trauma often binds us in patterns of reactivity. We believe any backward motion is weakness. But therapeutic healing invites reflection, reprocessing, and reintegration. The step back is not regression, it is realignment. And with it comes compassion for ourselves, for others, for the journey. Closing meditation tonight, before you sleep. Imagine standing on a path. You have walked far. You are tired. Ahead is fog. Behind is memory. Instead of rushing forward, take one breath and one step back. Feel the ground beneath you. Feel your body soften. Repeat softly, I allow myself to begin. Again, not from punishment, but from presence. The Buddha said, if you want to fly, give up everything that weighs you down, even the story of how far you should have gone by now. Let go, step back, and listen. That sound, it is the beginning of peace. Story 6. Clouds don't ask where they're going. Asterisk, asterisk, there was a boy named Toma who never stopped asking questions. From the time he could speak, his mind burned with inquiry. Why is the sky blue? Where does the wind sleep? What happens after we die? His father, a farmer, would chuckle and shrug. His mother, a weaver, would give him metaphors he barely understood. But none of the answers satisfied him as he grew. So did his hunger for certainty. He studied science, read scriptures, debated priests. He traveled from village to village, carrying notebooks filled with diagrams, timelines, and equations. Every time he believed he was close to understanding life, something would change. A friend would die unexpectedly. A storm would destroy what seemed safe. A promise would dissolve into silence. This drove Toma to restlessness. If I could only know, he would mutter, just know where things are going, I could live in peace. Eventually, his search led him to a distant Zen temple perched on a hill above a lake so still it mirrored the sky. The temple had no sign, no doors, only a long wooden corridor open to the elements, and a small bell swaying in the breeze. Toma arrived in late spring, when the cherry blossoms had just begun to fall. He bowed before the head monk, a woman named Master Kaio, whose face was lined with the quiet of many years. I seek understanding, he said. I have read, studied, meditated, but still I suffer. I wake each day wondering what will happen, where this life is going, and why I feel lost even when everything is fine. I need to know. Master Kaio looked at him with a gaze that neither judged nor comforted. She simply said, then you must. Watch the clouds. Toma blinked. The clouds, she nodded. That is your cone. He had expected sutras, silence, perhaps even chores, but watching clouds. Still, he obeyed. Each morning, he would climb the small grassy hill behind the temple and lie on his back, staring at the sky. At first, it felt pointless. The clouds drifted lazily, some white and puffy, others stretched like silk ribbons. They moved in no particular direction. Sometimes they scattered, sometimes they gathered. They paid no mind to him or each other. Toma grew bored. Then, annoyed, he returned to Master Kaio. I've been watching, he said, but the clouds don't go anywhere. They don't explain anything. Kaio poured him tea and replied, exactly. He frowned. But I want to know what's next. I want to understand the path, the meaning, direction. I can't keep floating like this. Kaio sipped her tea. Clouds don't ask where they're going. They simply become. Toma stared at her. That's not an answer. No, she said. It's the end of the question. The next day, he returned to the hill, and again the day after. But something was different. He stopped trying to solve. The clouds. He just watched. He noticed how they changed shape, not with struggle, but with surrender. How they carried storms, then sunlight, then disappeared. How the sky held them all without judgment. And one afternoon, he noticed something. In himself, a tightness loosening. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Released, he sat up slowly, as if waking from a long dream. For the first time in years. He wasn't searching, he was simply seeing. One evening, a sudden storm swept across the lake. The monks hurried to secure the doors, tie the shutters. Wind tore through the temple corridors, blowing out candles and rattling bells. Toma stood at the veranda, soaked and still, watching the sky split open. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled, but the clouds did not scream or resist. They moved, wild and free, by morning. The storm had passed. The lake was calm again. Toma found Master Kaio tending to the garden, picking up fallen branches. I didn't panic, he said. Quietly, Godke, I smiled, because you saw the sky beyond the storm. Weeks later, Kaio called him to the meditation hall. I have a final task for you, she said. Cross the lake, climb the ridge. There is a hermit there who once sought what you sought. Bring him this bowl of rice. Toma accepted the task and departed before dawn. As he rowed across the lake, mist curled around his boat. He looked up. The clouds were moving again slowly, like old dancers. He smiled. He understood now. They had always moved with the wind, but never lost their shape, even as they changed, even as they dissolved. The hermit greeted him with silence. Toma offered the bowl and said, "I used to believe I had to know where life was taking me, and now?" The hermit asked. Toma looked at the sky. "I still don't know, but I no longer need to." The hermit nodded once, and together they watched the clouds pass overhead. Philosophical reflection in Zen. The mind that seeks certainty is like a clenched fist trying to grasp water. The tighter it squeezes, the more it loses. To awaken is not to know where we are going. It is to stop demanding that we must. Clouds move without a map. They change without asking. They become without resistance. And yet they are part of the whole, inseparable from the sky, the wind, the rain, the sun dot. So are we, the Buddha taught. Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. When we surrender the need to control the destination, we begin to trust the current dot. This trust is not ignorance. It is wisdom softened by compassion. Psychological reflection anxiety often stems from a need to predict, to control, to guarantee. The modern mind is obsessed with certainty, future plans, outcomes, labels. But life is dynamic. The unknown is not a threat. It is the natural state of being. Learning to watch the clouds, as Toma did, mirrors cognitive diffusion in psychology, the practice of observing thoughts and emotions without becoming entangled in them. We learn to say, "There is fear," rather than "I am afraid." There is uncertainty, not "I am lost." In this space of observation, peace returns, not because we figured it all out, but because we remembered that we don't need to. Closing meditation night before sleep. Look at the sky if you can dot or close your eyes and imagine it. The wide open sky, clouds moving across it, some heavy, some light, all changing, all unresisting. And ask yourself, can I be like the cloud, trusting the wind, becoming without needing to know? Repeat softly, I do not need to know where I am going to be fully here. Let that be enough. Let the sky hold. You let the journey unfold as the clouds drift on, without question, without fear. Rest now, and when you rise, let the next moment carry you gently forward. Story 7. The Candle That Refused to Burn. In the northwestern highlands, where the fog lingered all day and even the birds sang in whispers, there was a temple carved into the face of a cliff. No road led to it, only a narrow footpath through tangled cypress and moss-covered stones. Travelers rarely found it by accident, but those who did often arrived broken, not in body but in spirit. It was said the temple had no name, only a silence. That healed, among its few residents, was a woman named Chi. She had come many years before, though no one quite remembered when. Her presence was gentle but firm, like the steady hand of someone who once survived great fire. She had a quiet way of knowing when to speak and when to simply pour tea. The younger monks called her the keeper of the inner flame, not because she taught meditation or scriptures, but because she lit the temple candles every evening at twilight, without fail, without haste. One winter, a novice arrived at the temple, covered in road dust and questions. His name was Oki. He was 20, intense, and deeply afraid of something he couldn't name. He had left his home without telling his family, carrying only a satchel of books and a weight he could not place. Chi was the first to meet him at the temple gate. "I've come to find peace," he said. She looked into his eyes and nodded once. Then, "First," she said, "come and light the evening candles." The temple had no electricity. At night, it lived in firelight. Along the hallways and in the main chamber stood dozens of clay lanterns and tall wax candles. Each one had to be lit by hand. It was both ritual and necessity, a kind of breathing done through flame. She gave Aki a small oil lamp and a bundle of matches. "Light them all," she said, "and begin with this one." She pointed to a thin, ivory-colored candle at the base of a stone Buddha. Aki struck the match, held it to the wick, but nothing happened. He tried again, and again. The flame refused to catch. He frowned, tried with more pressure, angled the match differently, still nothing. Frustrated, he lit a different candle beside it. It flared to life immediately. Then he returned to the stubborn one. But the wick remained cold. He looked at Chi. "This one is faulty," he said. "The wax is too old." She smiled slightly. "Then try again tomorrow." For the next several days, Aki tried. Every evening, he struck the match, held the flame steady, waited and each time, the candle remained unchanged. The others lit beautifully dancing flames in the twilight haze, but the same one, always the same, would not burn. It began to haunt him. How could one candle resist fire? He examined the wick. It seemed intact. He even trimmed it slightly. Still nothing. Eventually, he stopped lighting the others and focused only on that one by the 10th night. He was furious. He flung the match to the ground, turned to Chi and said, "It refuses me." Chi raised an eyebrow. "Refuses you?" "Yes," Aki said. "It's personal. I've done everything right. I've followed the ritual. I've been patient, but it won't yield." She walked over, looked at the candle, then looked at him. "Maybe," she said, "it is not refusing. Maybe it is simply not ready." Aki clenched his jaw. "It's just wax, just a wick." "No," she said, "it's a mirror." That night, he lay in his small room, staring at the wooden beams above. He hated how much the candle disturbed him. It was irrational, childish, but still, something about it touched a raw nerve. He thought back to his life before the temple. How many times had he tried to light himself? To be the perfect son, student, partner. He had practiced piano for hours to please his father. He had memorized philosophical texts to seem wise to his professors. He had stayed silent in arguments to avoid losing people. Each effort had felt like striking a match again and again and again, but the flame never caught. He always felt cold, unseen, hollow. Now he saw it. He was the candle the next evening. He did not bring frustration. He sat before the unlit candle, watched it gently, bowed, and whispered, "When you are ready." He did not strike a match. He just waited. For the first time, he let it be, and something shifted, not in the candle, but in him, a warmth, subtle, quiet, the kind that doesn't burn, but glows. Weeks passed. Aki stopped trying to light the candle instead. He sat with it. He cleaned around it. He offered incense near it. He treated it not as a task, but as a companion. Then one night, without expectation, he struck a match and brought it near, and the flame caught softly, effortlessly. It flickered once, then stood tall. Chi walked by and paused. She smiled. "Sometimes," she said, We must stop trying to burn in order to hold the flame. Oki bowed not to the candle, but to himself. Philosophical reflection in Zen. Not all effort leads to awakening. We are taught to sit, to breathe, to practice. But behind these actions often hides craving, the desire to ignite, to shine, to be seen. The candle that refused to burn was not broken. It was reflecting the fire. Inside the seeker, a fire not yet kindled in stillness. There is a cone that asks, "What is your original face before your parents were born?" The answer is not in thought. It is in presence, in letting go of the need to perform, and allowing the self to arrive naturally. The Buddha said, "As a flame blown by the wind goes out and cannot be called back, so too is the nature of all conditioned things. To hold a flame, we must first become the stillness that shelters it." Psychological reflection. So often in modern life, we try to fix ourselves to become better, brighter, worthier. We read the books, do the rituals, follow the routines. And when nothing shifts, we feel broken, defective. But healing does not always happen on command. Sometimes the self resists because it is protecting something sacred. Sometimes the flame does not come because the foundation is not yet ready to hold it. In psychological terms, this is the wisdom of pacing, of honoring the nervous system's need. For safety before transformation, the candle will burn, but only when it trusts the holder. Aki's journey teaches us that presence heals more than pressure. Gentleness awakens more than striving. And readiness blooms not from demand, but from acceptance. Closing meditation at night, as you sit in the dim light, perhaps with a candle near your bed, ask yourself, what part of me have I been trying to force into flame? What am I calling broken simply because it is not ready? Can I sit with that part in kindness, without needing it to change? Repeat softly, "When you are ready, I will be here." Let that be your vow. Let your heart become the holder of gentle fires. Let your soul learn to glow, not from ignition, but from invitation. As the Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself. Be your own refuge." Now close your eyes. Feel the warmth not of a fire you started, but of one you welcomed. Rest and let the next story rise with the dawn. Story 8. Beneath the Bodhi tree, nothing bloomed. The village of Akaru was quiet by nature. It had no marketplace, no festival drums, no distant laughter from inns. Just rice paddies in soft green lines, a single stone well, and the outline of forested hills rising like folded hands around it. In the center of the village stood a Bodhi tree. It was old, perhaps older than the village itself. Its trunk was thick with age, bark split and curled, and its roots jutted above the ground like the backs of ancient turtles. Every morning, birds sang in its branches, and every evening, someone would light a small oil lamp at its base. For generations, villagers believed the tree brought peace. Babies were named beneath it. Elders whispered prayers into its leaves. And once a year, during the full moon festival, offerings were placed beneath it: bowls of rice, sweet fruits, tiny cups of tea, as if the tree itself could taste and bless. But one spring, something changed. The blossoms didn't come. The villagers waited, watched, whispered, but the Bodhi tree remained bare. No new shoots, no tender green dot, no bloom dot. At first, they said it was the weather. Then they said the soil had soured. Then they blamed themselves. Had they forgotten a ritual? Had someone broken a vow? Old women began placing more lamps beneath the trunk. Children drew faces in the dust beside its roots, hoping to make it smile, but the tree stood still, unbloomed, silent, as if waiting for something no one could name. In a house at the edge of the village lived a woman named Hannah. She was neither old nor young, neither revered nor forgotten. She was the widow of a stonecutter who had drowned in the river 2 winters prior, and the mother of a daughter who no longer spoke. Her life had collapsed quietly, no violence, no great cry, just a slow unraveling day after day like threads. Slipping from cloth. Each morning she walked to the tree with her daughter, Emi, who gripped her hand tightly but said nothing. They sat beneath its limbs, where Hannah used to sing lullabies and watch petals fall like snow. Now there was nothing to catch, just branches, empty. Like her. One evening, as the sun sank and the lamp at the Bodhi's base flickered, Hannah spoke, aloud for the first time in many days. "Why won't you bloom?" she asked. The tree. The wind passed through its branches, slow and steady. "Are you mourning too?" she whispered. Emi looked at her, eyes wide, but still said nothing, and Hannah, as if caught in a trance, leaned forward and pressed her forehead to the bark. "Please," she said softly. "I don't need fruit. I don't need shade. Just a sign that something still wants to live." But the tree remained as it was, and Hannah wept, not from despair, but from the weight of waiting. That night she dreamed of sitting under the tree again. Only this time it was upside down, its roots in the sky, its branches buried underground. She asked the tree in her dream, "Why are you like this?" And it replied, not with words, but with a sensation. Stillness, depth becoming. She woke before dawn, heart pounding with something that wasn't sadness, not yet hope, but a different kind of breath. She returned to the tree. The next morning, alone, she did not bring flowers, or offerings, or prayers. She brought only a small spade, and she began to dig, not at the roots, but at the base, nearby. She dug gently, pulling away old leaves, compacted soil, stones, and there, beneath the hardened surface, she found the earth. Was damp, not dead, just waiting. She dug a circle wide enough for water to gather. Then, each morning, she returned with a bucket from the well. She did not water the tree. She simply poured the water into the soil, around it, and sat. No words, no requests, just presence. Day after day, week after week, her daughter began coming with her again, still silent, but sitting closer, sometimes resting her head against her mother's side. Sometimes placing a tiny flower in the freshly turned soil, not because they expected anything, but because it felt right. Summer arrived, and with it, heat. Dust clung to the wind. Cicadas cried like brittle music, still. The tree did not bloom. People stopped asking about it, stopped visiting. Only Hannah remained. She no longer needed the tree to change. It had become her mirror, her prayer mat, her friend. Then, one morning in Midagast, EMI tugged on her sleeve, pointed there. At the lowest branch, a single green shoot had emerged, small, barely visible, but alive. A few days later, another, then a bud, then a pale blossom, like a whisper on the branch. No fanfare, no miracle, just slow returning. Like breath after grief, the villagers began returning, one by one, lighting lamps again, placing fruit beneath the bark. But Hannah no longer needed ceremony. She smiled at the bloom, not because it meant the tree had healed, but because the tree had not failed. It had simply taken the time it needed and taught her to do the same. Philosophical reflection in Zen. Not all silence is absence. Not all stillness is death. Sometimes, what we call nothing is merely becoming. The Bodhi tree, like the mind, must rest, must retreat, must fall into its own roots to remember how to rise. The world asks us to bloom constantly, to produce, to perform. But awakening is not performance, it is presence. The Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree for many days before enlightenment, and even after awakening. He did not ask the tree to bloom, he simply bowed to it, because it had sheltered him. During becoming, we must learn to do the same, to honor the seasons of pause, to trust the still soil, even when nothing seems to grow. Psychological reflection. Psychological terms. What Hannah experienced was the slow emergence from trauma-induced numbness after profound loss or emotional shock. The body and mind enter a state of protective dormancy, not because we are broken, but because healing must begin beneath the surface. We may appear empty, unfeeling, frozen, but beneath. Life is preparing, waiting. Waiting grief is not something we get over. It is something we carry until it becomes quiet enough to place down. Bodhi tree did not bloom on command, nor did Hannah, but with time, with presence, with non-demanding care. They both returned, not to what they were, but to what they were ready to become. Closing meditation tonight. Before you sleep, ask yourself, what part of me has stopped blooming? What soil have I declared dead without checking its depth? Can I let that part rest, without rush, without shame? Repeat softly, I am becoming, even in stillness. Trust the pause, water the roots, let the blossom come when it is ready. As the Buddha once said, do not try to become anything. Do not make yourself into anything. Just be. Let that be your breath. Let that be your rest. And when you wake, return gently to the place where even nothing becomes enough. Story 9. The boy who returned without the answer. Asterisk, asterisk. In a coastal town where the cliffs met the ocean like old friends leaning into conversation, there lived a boy named Ren. He was known for two things, his silence and his gaze that seemed older than his years. At 15, he rarely played with other children. He preferred the rhythm of the tides, the call of seabirds, and the distant blinking of the lighthouse lamp. One afternoon, after another quiet meal in the small house he shared with his grandfather, Ren spoke a sentence he had never spoken before. Grandfather, what is the meaning of life? The old man, a retired fisherman with sun-leathered skin and a voice like low thunder, looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, not with amusement, but with a kind of deep recognition. You are asking a question I spent my whole life carrying, he said, and now you are ready to carry it too. Ren frowned, but I want an answer. I know, his grandfather said gently. That's why you must leave, leave. The old man nodded toward the sea. There's a monastery in the eastern mountains, past the rice fields and beyond the forest of crows. Go there, ask your question to the monks. Stay until you find your answer. Ren hesitated. He had never traveled far, but the weight of the question had already grown heavy in his chest. He packed a few belongings, said goodbye, and walked east the next morning with the first light. The journey took 3 days. He passed villages draped in incense smoke, bridges lined with paper lanterns, and farmers who offered him sweet potatoes and tea. On the 4th morning, he arrived at the monastery, a quiet place carved into stone. wrapped in mist and bell chimes. The monks greeted him without surprise. "I seek the meaning of life," he said to the head monk. The monk, a slender woman with eyes like rain-soaked earth, bowed slightly. "Then stay with us," she said. "The temple is open to all who walk with sincerity." Ren stayed. At first he waited for someone to speak, to reveal a secret, to hand him an answer. But the monks only swept, sat, chanted, cooked, watched the seasons pass like clouds. They gave him a robe and a daily rhythm. No one asked him to speak of his question again, and no one answered it. Weeks turned into months. Ren practiced silence. He sat through winter. He walked through spring. He began to sense the pattern in small things, the way leaves crumbled when held too tightly, the way rice steamed into softness, the way pain and joy lived side by side in the breath. But the question remained always the question. Each night, before sleep, he whispered it to the dark. "What is the meaning of life?" No one replied. One summer afternoon, while sweeping dry leaves from the temple gate, he saw a child pointing at a dragonfly. The child was laughing, just laughing, for no reason and for a fleeting moment. Ren felt something shift in his chest. Not an answer, but a loosening. 3 years passed. One morning, the head monk approached him. "Have you found what you came for?" she asked. Ren looked at her. "I haven't found the answer," he said. She studied him quietly. "Then perhaps you are ready to return." He bowed and began his journey home. His village had not changed much. The cliffs still spoke to the sea. The lighthouse still blinked. But his grandfather was older now, slower. His hands trembled slightly when he poured tea. Ren sat across from him, both of them quiet. Finally, his grandfather asked, "Did you find it?" Ren looked down at his cup. "I thought I would. I thought someone would tell me. But no one did. And now I feel like I've failed." The old man chuckled. "You didn't fail," he said. "You just found what the question becomes." Ren frowned. "Becomes?" His grandfather nodded. "When you were younger, you believed. There was a single answer. But life is not a riddle to solve. It's a presence to meet." Ren sat back, the words sinking in like rain on dry ground. "So then what is the meaning?" he asked again, softly. The old man reached forward and tapped the cup in Ren's hands. "The meaning is in this. In a cup of tea." "No," he said, smiling. "In the act of offering. In the breath you take before you drink. In the silence between your question and the next word you speak." Ren was quiet. And this time, not because he didn't know what to say, but because the silence was enough. That evening, he walked to the cliffs, watched the ocean stretch into the horizon, endless and shifting. He thought of the monastery, the sweeping, the steam rising from rice bowls, the dragonfly, the child's laugh. He still didn't have an answer, but he no longer needed one. He had returned not with knowledge, but with space, and into that space, life could speak for itself. Philosophical reflection in Zen. There is no final answer. The mind that seeks truth as a destination often overlooks the path that is unfolding underfoot. Ren's journey is not unique. It mirrors the spiritual path of many. The desire to understand is natural, but the clinging to understanding is the very thing that blinds us to the truth. The meaning of life is not a sentence. It is a moment fully lived, a cup held with both hands, a breath taken with awareness, a question held without urgency. As Zen Master Rinzai once said, If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him, not out of disrespect, but to let go of fixed answers. Because truth must be tasted, not told. Psychological reflection, cognitive development often leads us from concrete thinking to abstract reflection. In youth, we seek definitive answers. We want the world to be mapped, ordered, predictable. But maturity invites us to live inside the questions. In psychology, this is the transition from black and white thinking to dialectical awareness, holding paradox, nuance, and ambiguity without distress. Ren's disappointment is real, but so is his transformation. He learns to stay with the question, not to resolve it, to dwell in the richness it brings. This capacity to hold uncertainty without panic is foundational to emotional resilience, and in that space of joy returns, laughter, stillness, the sound of waves against the cliff. Closing meditation tonight. Ask yourself, what question am I still waiting to answer? What meaning am I trying to grasp? Can I let the question rest, just for one breath? Not abandoned, but softened. Repeat gently. I do not need to solve life, to be alive within it. Let the waves speak. Let the silence hold you. As the Buddha once taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Now close your eyes. Let the question become a doorway, not a prison, and let your breath be the answer you carry forward. Story 10. The Girl Who Couldn't Stop Crying. Asterisk. In a valley shadowed by tall mountains and cradled by rivers that braided through the hills, there was a small hospice run by monks. It was not a place for the dying, though many passed through on their final journey. It was a place for those whose suffering had no clear cause, whose wounds lived not in the body, but somewhere deeper, like fog that lingered. Long after the storm, it was there that a girl named Eiko arrived. She was 17. She did not speak. She did not smile. She only cried, not in fits, not in outbursts. Her tears flowed gently, endlessly. From the moment she arrived, her eyes carried a quiet, persistent rain. She sat when told, ate when asked, slept when allowed, but her weeping never paused. The monks, used too many kinds of pain, did not rush. To name her sorrow, they offered her silence, food, space. They taught her to walk slowly, to drink tea in stillness, to feel the sun on her skin. But no ritual, no chant, no gentle hand could slow her tears. Some began to call her the Weeping Willow, not unkindly, but with a kind of reverent wonder, because her sadness was not loud or seeking attention. It simply was. One morning, a visiting monk named Sho arrived at the hospice. He was old, soft-spoken, and walked with a staff carved with small notches, one for every temple he had served. He had heard of the girl, and so he did what he always did when confronted with suffering. He sat not across from her, not beside her, but within her reach, quietly, like a mountain sits near a cloud. For many days they sat. She cried, he said nothing. Sometimes she looked at him, sometimes she didn't, but he stayed. On the 7th day, she spoke. Only one sentence. I can't make it stop. Her voice was raw, barely audible. Sho turned to her, eyes soft. You don't have to, he said. Eiko frowned. But everyone says I must heal. Sho smiled faintly. Is the rain broken because it falls? She didn't answer. Some pain, he continued, does not want to be fixed. It wants to be held. The next day, he gave her a bowl, wooden, smooth, worn by years of use. This is yours, he said. Whenever you feel a tear fall, catch it here. Aiko tilted her head. What for? To see it, Sho replied, as water, not weakness. She took the bowl, carried it with her, cried into it. At first, she resented the act. It made her aware of each tear. But over time, something shifted. She began to notice their rhythm. Some fell heavy, others light. Some came with a memory, others with nothing at all. And for the first time, her crying felt less like drowning and more like breathing. Sho met with her again beneath the cherry tree behind the hospice. How is your bowl? He asked. She looked down. It's full. Then empty it into the earth, he said. She hesitated. It feels wrong, she whispered, to pour sorrow into the ground. Sho knelt beside her. The earth, he said, has carried heavier things than this, and still it blooms. So she tipped the bowl, and the tears joined the soil. Weeks passed. Aiko still cried, but now she walked through the hospice gardens. She spoke softly. To the monks who offered her tea, she sat by the river and traced shapes in the water with a twigged up one evening. A child came to her, sobbing over a broken pendant. Aiko sat beside her and placed the wooden bowl in the child's hands. Let it fall here, she said. The child did, and after a time they laughed. Just once, but it echoed. Sho watched from the veranda. A fellow monk asked, "Is she healed?" Sho shook his head. "She is healing. That is different." Philosophical reflection in Zen. There is no rule that says emotion must be eradicated. The goal is not to suppress, but to understand the nature of mind as it moves. Tears are not weakness. They are a river. What makes them painful is not their presence, but our resistance. To cry with awareness is to cleanse. To witness each tear as sacred is to practice compassion, not only for others, but for ourselves. As the Buddha taught, just as a mother would protect her only child with her life, even so let one cultivate a boundless love toward all beings. That includes the one within, especially her. Psychological reflection in the world of therapy. There is a concept called emotional regulation, not meaning suppression, but the ability to experience emotion without being overwhelmed. ICO's journey mirrors this process. At first, her crying was uncontrolled, undefined. It ruled her, but through mindfulness, presence, and non-judgmental witnessing, she began to understand the tears. She named them, held them, paced them, and in doing so, reclaimed agency. This is a form of trauma integration, where the emotion does not vanish, but transforms, not into happiness, but into wholeness. Closing meditation tonight. If tears visit, you welcome them, not as enemies, but as water drawn from deep within. Sit quietly, place a bowl beside you, real or imagined, and say to yourself, these tears are not a failure, they are a release. Let them fall, let them speak, and when you are ready, return them to the earth. As the Buddha once said, pain is certain, suffering is optional. Now breathe, and let your breath carry you beyond the sorrow, to the place where weeping is. Just another way to say, I am still here. Story 11. The Silent Bell of the Abandoned Temple, ****, at the edge of a forgotten valley where moss covered stones like memory covers time. There stood an old temple no longer named in maps or remembered in chants. The villagers nearby called it Kozanji, though no one knew if that had ever been its real name. They said it was haunted, not by spirits, but by silence. The temple had no roof, no monks, no incense, no scripture, only a single bronze bell suspended on a wooden beam, long turned grey by weather and time. It had not rung in decades. Vines grew up its legs, dust made a home in its mouth, and still it remained. Children dared each other to run up to it and touch it. Most ran away before they reached it. Others tapped it gently, hoping it would ring. But it never did, not even a hum, as though it had made peace with its stillness and would no longer speak. But one spring, a man named Tetsuya came to the valley. He was not young, but he walked like someone who had only recently begun to carry the full weight of age. He had once been a teacher in the city, and before that, a father, and before that, a husband. Now he was none of those things. His wife had died in winter. His daughter no longer spoke to him, and his classroom had been closed after the school fell to budget cuts. He came not seeking Zen, not seeking God, only a place quiet enough to hear whatever voice might still be speaking inside him. He found the abandoned temple by accident, or perhaps it found him. He stepped into the courtyard, surprised at how intact it felt despite the years, as if it had been waiting for someone not to restore it, but to witness it. And then he saw the bell. It stood beneath a warped wooden frame, surrounded by ivy and bird droppings. The beam above was cracked, and the bell's surface was dark with rust. But something in him paused. He sat beneath the bell, did not try to touch it, did not try to understand it. He simply stayed. The first day, he said nothing. The second day, he wept. He did not expect it. The tears came like wind in a room with no windows, unexpected, uninvited, and complete. He cried for his wife, for the way she used to hum while washing rice. He cried for his daughter, for the words they had left unsaid. He cried for the students, who had once called him sensei with such bright eyes and now lived their lives far from him. The bell did not ring, but he felt it watching, not as a presence, but as an emptiness that did not resist being. Seen dark days past, he returned each morning, sat beneath the bell. Some villagers began to whisper about him. The man who listens to silence, they said. But Tetsuya did not listen to silence. He listened. Through it, and in the spaces where words might once have been, he began to hear things he had long forgotten. The rhythm of his own breath, the sound of leaves rubbing against each other, the faint echo of the past folding itself into the present. And then, one evening, just as the light was leaving the valley, he did something he had not planned. He stood up, faced the bell, and bowed, not to wake it, but to thank it for its silence. Then, with the smallest of gestures, he raised the weathered mallet that lay on the ground nearby, its handle half sunk in mud. He tapped the bell. Once it did not ring, but it moved. Slightly, a low, soft vibration pulsed through the air. Not a sound, exactly, not even a tone, but a breath long held, finally exhaled. He returned every day. Sometimes he would strike the bell softly, knowing now that ringing was not the only form of response. Sometimes he would sit without. Touching it, he began to bring others, not many, just those who had lost something they could not name. Mother who had missed her, an old friend who had stopped writing poems, a young man who could no longer remember why he woke up each morning. They would sit together beneath the bell, not in prayer, but in presence. They called it the temple that listens, and the bell the teacher who does not speak. Years later, a monk who had wandered far returned to the valley. He found the temple still roofless, still broken, but alive in the courtyard. People sat in circles, some in tears, some in laughter, some in silence, that felt more full than words. And the monk, upon hearing their stories, said quietly, "The bell has never stopped ringing. You've just learned how to hear it." Philosophical reflection in Zen. We are often reminded that true sound is not always audible. The most profound teachings do not always arrive through words, or even through voice. Sometimes the deepest realizations come through that which does not speak. The bell that refuses to ring is not broken. It is simply pointing beyond. Sound beyond answers, beyond performance. It invites us to sit with what is not to fix, not to stir, but to witness. As Zen master Song San once taught, open mouth already a mistake. In this world of noise, the abandoned temple teaches a radical lesson. Silence is not absence, it is offering. Psychological reflection. Modern life conditions us to expect feedback. We seek affirmation. We interpret silence as rejection. We ring the bell and feel unseen when it does not echo. But what if the silence is the response? In therapy, we speak of holding space, a state of presence where nothing is forced, nothing is rushed. A place where a person is allowed to simply be, without judgment or correction. The silent bell is that space. Tetsuya's healing did not come from revelation or breakthrough. It came from sitting with what was painful, from being seen, not fixed, from remembering that not all sounds come through ears. Some come through stillness. Some come through waiting long enough to let the soul speak in its own time. Closing meditation. Close your eyes. Imagine yourself standing before a great bronze bell. It does not ring, it does not shine, it simply waits, and in its waiting you feel seen. Ask yourself, where in my life am I expecting a sound, a sign, a reply? Can I let silence be enough? Repeat softly, I will listen through the silence. I will trust what echoes cannot hold. Let the quiet deepen. Let your breath slow. As the Buddha once said, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace, but sometimes no word is needed, only stillness. Now rest, and when the morning comes, carry the bell within you. Let the next story find you in that quiet place. Story 12. The Stone That Floated in Dreams. Asterisk, asterisk. There was once a boy who dreamed of drowning every night. His name was Michio. He lived in a lakeside village known for still waters and steady winds. By all accounts, his life was uneventful. His father carved oars for fishermen. His mother ran a small tea stall shaded by willows. Michio was neither the brightest nor the slowest child in the village. He had friends, a warm place to sleep, and food to eat. Yet each night he closed his eyes and found himself sinking in the dream. It always began the same way. He stood by the lake, skipping stones, the air silent except for the lap of water. Then, without warning, he would fall in, not dive, not jump, but fall as if the earth had shifted. Down he went, deeper and deeper, though his arms flailed and his legs kicked. He could see the surface, the shimmer of light, but never reach it. The water was heavy. It pulled at him like a memory, and always, just before his breath gave out. He would see a single stone rise past him, smooth, grey, impossibly buoyant, floating upward toward the sky. Then he would wake, sweating, gasping, still breathing, but unsure how. He told no one. Until one evening, while helping his mother grind roasted barley for tea, he asked quietly, "Can stones float?" His mother, without turning from the kettle, said, "Only in dreams." And then, more softly, or when they are no longer trying to be stones. Michio did not know what she meant, but the words stayed. One day, a traveling monk came through the village. He was old, with robes the color of wood smoke, and eyes that looked as if they had watched mountains crumble. He sat at Michio's mother's tea stall, sipping slowly, watching the lake with a kind of listening that didn't require ears. Michio, drawn by some thread he couldn't name, approached him. "Do you dream?" he asked. The monk turned. "Always, of drowning." The monk studied him for a moment. "Once," he said, "a long time ago." Michio hesitated. "And now I dream of the stone." Michio's eyes widened. "The one that floats." The monk nodded. "But stones don't float." The monk smiled. "Not when they think they are stones." That evening, the monk walked with Michio to the lake. They sat in silence, watching the wind skate across the surface. The boy held a flat rock in his hand, turning it over and over. "I keep sinking," he said finally. The monk looked at him. "In the dream and in the day," Michio replied. "I don't know why. It's like something is pulling me down, even when nothing is wrong." The monk nodded slowly. "There are weights we carry," he said, "that have no shape. Worries passed down, sorrows borrowed, fears unspoken. And like stones in the pockets of the mind, they pull us beneath the surface." "But I don't know what mine are," Michio whispered. "You don't need to," the monk said. "You only need to stop believing they belong to you." They returned to the lake for many days. The monk taught Michio to breathe, not just to survive, but to feel, to walk slowly, to listen to birdsong without trying to name the bird, to feel sadness in the chest without needing a reason, to hold a stone in the palm and ask it nothing. One morning, the monk gave Michio a smooth black pebble. "Sleep with this under your pillow," he said. "Why? Because tonight you will float." That night, Michio dreamed again. The lake, fall, the sinking. But this time, when the weight pulled at his ankles, he did not fight. He opened his arms, let the water hold him, and as he sank, he felt the stone in his hand grow lighter, so light it rose from his grip, and for the first time, he did not watch it leave with longing. He simply let it go, and as it floated up, something inside him followed. He did not rise quickly, but gently, as if the water itself wanted him returned. He broke the surface, not gasping, but breathing. Calm, present, awake. He woke at dawn, the pillow damp with sweat or tears. He wasn't sure, but the stone was warm in his palm, and he felt something new in his chest. Not joy exactly, but buoyancy, a quiet lift where once there had only been weight. The monk left that afternoon. He gave no farewell, only left a note beneath. Michio's cup, it read. When the mind no longer clings to what it thinks is solid, it learns to float. Philosophical reflection in Zen: the self is not fixed. We cling to ideas of who we are, our past, our pain, our names, and those ideas become heavy. They drown us in repetition. We fight to stay afloat, but it is our identity that pulls us under. The floating stone in Michio's dream was not defying gravity. It was letting go of its definition in the Heart Sutra. The Buddha taught form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. When we stop insisting that we are stone, we become cloud, breath, sky. Buoyant. Awake. Psychological reflection: Michio's recurring dream is a manifestation of subconscious overwhelming, emotional burden with no clear shape. Often in trauma or anxiety, the nervous system feels the heaviness of experience that cannot be articulated. Drowning dreams are common. They represent the felt sense of being, submerged by emotion, by expectation, by the weight of the unspoken. Healing begins not in solving the dream, but in changing our relationship to it. By practicing mindfulness, embodiment, and non-attachment, the dream shifts. The body reinterprets the signal, and new neural patterns emerge. Buoyancy is not the absence of depth. It is the skill of staying present within it. Closing meditation tonight. Before sleep, place a small object, a stone, a bead, a folded paper in your palm. Hold it gently and ask, what weight am I still carrying? What story have I told myself for so long that I forgot it was optional? Now, imagine letting it go. Let the lake receive it. Let the surface close above it. Repeat softly, I do not need to sink to be real. I can float. I can rest. As the Buddha once said, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so too does the Dharma have one taste, the taste of liberation. Now breathe. Feel your breath as watered your chest as vessel, your body as driftwood. Float, and let the next story rise, gentle as dawn. Story 13. The fisherman who never threw his net. Asterisk, asterisk, in a coastal village carved between jagged cliffs and black sand shores, there lived an old fisherman named Joji. Each morning, before the sun had even thought to rise, he would walk barefoot across the wet rocks to the edge of the sea, carrying his wide circular net coiled like a sleeping snake over his shoulder. He would sit on the same flat stone, the one worn smooth by decades of tide, and gaze across the waves. He never threw the net. Children whispered stories about him. He's waiting for a ghost fish. He made a vow never to catch again. No, he forgot how. But none of them truly knew. They only saw what appeared. An old man watching the ocean, net in hand, doing nothing. The younger fishermen mocked him behind closed doors. A net that gathers dust, they said. A man who's forgotten how to live. Yet Joji never responded. He simply kept coming, day after day, to the same stone. He never fished, but he always waited. One late autumn morning, a boy named Kato approached the stone. He was 14, stubborn, and angry in the way that only boys who've recently lost their fathers can be. His father, a fisherman too, had drowned the year before, swallowed by a storm that didn't announce itself until it was too late. Since then, Kato had refused to touch the sea. He passed it, glanced at it, cursed it, but he would not approach it. Until that morning, he had watched Joji from afar for weeks, and now, without knowing why, he walked across the rocks and sat beside him. The old man didn't turn, didn't speak, just sat, holding the net gently in his lap like a prayer forgotten. After a long silence, Kato said, "Why don't you fish?" Joji's eyes stayed on the horizon. "The sea doesn't owe me anything," he replied. "But isn't that what fishermen do? Take." Joji smiled faintly. "Not all nets are meant to be thrown." Kato returned the next day, and the next. He never asked questions again, but sat beside Joji, trying to understand the silence that stretched between them. Sometimes, Joji would speak never directly, only in fragments. "One day, the sea took more than I could give," or "some fish, if you chase them, dissolve into shadow," or once, "there's a kind of hunger that grows when you no longer want to eat." Kato didn't always understand, but he listened, and in that listening, something softened. His grief, once sharp and loud, began to change shape. Less a wound, more a space. One morning, the sky bloomed crimson before the sun arrived. Joji stood. For the first time, Kato stood too, startled. Joji turned to him. "Today," he said, "you'll throw the net." Kato hesitated. "But I don't know how." Joji placed the net in his arms. "Throw not to catch," he said, "but to remember." So Kato stepped. Forward he breathed. He spun, and he cast the net into the waves. It hit the water with a soft slap and sank like silk. They waited, pulled it, in Doti. In Tito's chest felt full. He looked to Joji expecting a lesson. But the old man was already walking away. Not out of dismissal, but completion. The next morning, he was gone. Some said he had passed in his sleep. Others believed he had finally walked into the sea. But the net remained, folded neatly on the stone, waiting years. Past Kato grew into a man. He became a fisherman, like his father, but different. He never boasted of his catches. He never chased storms, and once a year, on the day of that crimson sky, he would sit on Joji's stone, holding the old net. He never threw it, but he always waited, and when children asked why, he would smile and say, "Not all fishing is for fish." Philosophical reflection. In Zen, action is not always the path. Sometimes, in stillness, we learn more than in movement. Joji's refusal to cast his net was not laziness or fear. It was devotion to something lost, to something remembered, to a presence beyond utility in our striving. We forget that not all value lies in outcome. There is dignity in the waiting. There is wisdom in the pause. The Buddha once said, "There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path." Joji's silence was a form of practice. His net, a cone, not to be solved, but to be sat, withheld, understood. Without answers, psychological reflection. Joji and Kato's story reflects two movements of grief. Joji frozen, in sorrow, unable to engage with what once gave him life. Kato burning in anger, resisting the source of his pain. Through proximity and shared presence, their emotional truths shifted. Joji transmitted not explanation, but embodiment. He showed that healing is not always about resuming the old rhythm, but finding a new tempo that honors the wound. Kato, in casting the net without needing to catch, reclaims agency. He throws not to recover what was lost, but to move through what remains. This reflects a key principle in trauma therapy. Approach the source of pain slowly, gently, without needing it to respond. That is how integration begins. That is how the nervous system relearns safety, not through force, but through witnessing. Closing meditation tonight. Close your eyes. Imagine holding a net in your hands, not to throw, not to catch, just to feel. Let it represent all the efforts you've made, all the things you've waited. For now, imagine setting it down. Let the sea breathe without your demand. Let the waves rise and fall. Repeat softly, "I do not need to cast to be complete. I do not need answers to rest." As the Buddha once said, peace is not found in seeking, but in ceasing to seek. Let the net be, let yourself be, and in the stillness between tides, let the next story rise. Story 14. The visitor who never left. The wind arrived before the visitor. It blew through the eastern windows of the temple, rattling the paper walls, bending the thin bamboo stalks in the courtyard. The monks paused in their morning rituals, sensing change. The abbot, a slender man named Ryoton, looked up from his calligraphy and simply nodded. as if he'd known this wind would come by afternoon. The visitor stood at the temple gate. She was not dressed like a pilgrim. Her robe was not ceremonial. Her feet were dusty from the road. Her eyes, however, held the weight of distance both, walked and suffered. "I've come," she said, "to stay for a few days. If that's permitted." Ryoton met her gaze. "May stay," he said. "But no, there's some guests stay longer than they think." She bowed without speaking. That night, she was given a small cell facing the stone garden. She watched the raked lines curve like breath held and released. Room was silent, but her thoughts were not. She barely slept. The next morning, she joined the monks for walking meditation. Her steps were hesitant, her hands clenched without reason. She flinched at the sound of the bell. After breakfast, Ryoton found her in the corridor, staring out at the rain. "You did not give your name," he said gently. She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "I don't remember it." Ryoton said nothing. He placed a broom in her hands. "Then begin here." The visitor swept, not as an act of discipline, but because it was all she could do. She swept the walkways between the monks' quarters, the corners of the meditation hall, the cracked stones near the gate, and as she swept, the thoughts inside her grew louder. They spoke of everything she had run from: the failed relationship, the unbearable guilt, the voices that once promised clarity but offered only demands. She had come here not for Zen, not for peace, but for disappearance. But the temple would not let her disappear. It gave her form through tasks. It gave her time through rhythm. Each day, she was expected to be exactly where she was, nowhere else. After 1 week, she asked Ryoton, "When will the thoughts stop?" He looked at her. "Which thoughts?" "The ones that say I'm not enough." He smiled faintly. "They may never stop, but they may grow quieter." She clenched her fists. "I thought meditation would silence them." "No," he said. "Meditation teaches you to hear them, then let them pass like wind." She turned her head. "But this visitor, in my mind, she won't leave." Ryoton paused, then offer her tea. She blinked. "What?" "If a guest refuses to leave," he said, "make her welcome. Give her a seat. Let her speak. Then you may find she is not as terrifying as you imagined." That night, she did not fight the thoughts. She let them come. She named them gently: doubt, anger, shame, fear. She did not argue. She did not obey. She simply sat with them, and something began to soften. She no longer felt like she was drowning. She was hosting days turned into weeks. She became known not as the visitor, but as the one who listens to herself. She no longer asked to leave, not because she had found comfort, but because she had found presence. One afternoon, Ryoton approached her while she was watering the garden. "You've stayed longer than a few days," he said. She smiled. "I stopped counting," he asked. "And the visitor, in your mind?" She nodded toward the stone bench in the garden. "She's sitting there, watching the dragonflies." He bowed. "She must be grateful for your company." She returned the bow. "I think," she said, "she was never the enemy." The following spring, a new traveler arrived at the temple gate, eyes tired, heart heavy, before Ryoton could speak. The woman who had once been the visitor stepped forward. "You may stay," she said, "and know there's some guests stay longer than they think." The traveler looked at her in surprise. She smiled. "I did." Philosophical reflection in Zen: we do not seek to banish the self, we seek to see through its illusions. The visitor who refuses to leave the thought, the habit, the inner voices, not the enemy. It is the invitation. Our suffering often persists, not because it is powerful, but because we resist hosting it. We fear that to acknowledge it is to surrender. But awareness is not surrender, it is liberation. The Buddha taught, better than 100 years of ignorance is one day spent in mindful awareness. To be aware of the visitor is to reclaim space, not to evict, but to make peace. Psychological, reflection, cognitive behavioral therapy teaches us to notice our thoughts, label them, and distance from them. But the next step is acceptance. Acceptance. And commitment therapy act suggests we stop fighting every thought and instead make room for it observing without attachment. This is precisely what the visitor learns. When we resist an internal experience, we prolong it. When we invite it in, it transforms. The same voice that once ruled us becomes background. Music, not gone, but no longer in control. The process of healing is not erasure, it is integration. We learn to live with the parts we once exiled, and in doing so, we become whole. Closing. Meditation tonight, as you rest, ask yourself, what voice in me have I been trying to silence? What part of me has felt unwelcome? Can I offer it a seat, a cup of tea, a kind word? Repeat softly, I do not fear the visitor. I meet her with presence. As the Buddha once said, you yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and compassion. Let the visitor be. Let yourself be. And in the stillness of night, become the host you have always needed. Story 15. The Dog at the Temple Gate. Asterisk, asterisk, in a quiet region nestled between the ridges of two mist-heavy mountains, there stood an old Zen temple called Denshinji, the Temple of Transmission. The temple had no golden statues, no elaborate halls, only a modest wooden zendo, a kitchen that smelled of miso and ginger, and a stone path swept clean each morning by gentle hands, and a dog. He was not owned by anyone. He had no collar, no name. He simply appeared one spring morning, thin and limping, with fur the color of river clay and eyes too human to ignore. He wandered up the path, lay just beyond the temple gate, and refused to move. The monks noticed at first. They did not speak of it. Zen teaches not to grasp, not even to interpret too quickly, but still they watched. He did not beg, he did not bark, he simply lay there, silent, as if guarding something invisible. When the abbot, Master Junshin, passed him during morning rounds, he paused. The dog raised his head, but did not approach. Junshin offered no command, no gesture, only met the dog's eyes and whispered, "You may stay." From that day forward, the dog remained. He never entered the temple grounds, never crossed the wooden threshold. He kept vigil just outside the gate, like a sentry who had forgotten what he was guarding. The villagers began to call him Ino, just dog. They brought scraps. The monks left bowls of rice beside him, but he ate only once a day, and only after the monks had chanted the evening Heart Sutra. It was as if he, too, observed the rhythm of the temple. Weeks turned into months, and still he stayed. One day, a young monk named Ren approached Master Junshin with a furrowed brow. "Master," he said, "why does the dog not come inside?" Junshin looked toward the gate, "Because he is already inside, but his body is outside the wall." Junshin smiled, "And your body is inside the wall. Does that mean your mind is here too?" Ren lowered his gaze. "I see," he said softly. Over time, the monks grew accustomed to Ino's presence. When it rained, someone would tilt the gate's roof tiles to extend the overhang. When it snowed, someone always tucked a small blanket beside him. But the dog never asked, and he never crossed the gate. One morning, a group of visitors from a city monastery arrived. They were students of a renowned teacher, traveling to learn from the silence of Denshin-ji. They noticed the dog and laughed. What kind of temple allows a stray to sleep at its entrance? One even muttered, "He should be moved, he disrupts the purity of the path." Junshin heard them but said nothing. That evening, during Dharma talk, he told a story. There was once a dog who waited at the gates of awakening. He waited through rain and cold. He waited without complaint, without request. One day, a man came and told him, "Go away. You are not clean enough for enlightenment." And the dog looked at him, blinked, and remained still. For he knew something the man did not, that sometimes presence is the final teaching. The visitors fell silent. After that, no one spoke ill of Ino again. One winter morning, the monks found the dog lying still, his breath shallow, eyes dim. "Master." Junshin came and sat beside him. "You've kept watch a long time," he said gently. The dog blinked once. Junshin placed his hand on the dog's head and whispered, "You can let go now." The dog exhaled once, and did not inhale again. They buried him beneath the camphor tree just beyond the gate, not within the temple walls, but where he had chosen to be. Junshin wrote no eulogy, only carved one word into the stone beside the grave, Zaze, seated meditation. For that is what the dog had done seated in silence. Day after day, teaching without speech, the monks continued their lives. But each evening, after the Heart Sutra, someone would still place a bowl of rice at the gate, not for the dog, but for the memory of presence, for the lesson that sat beyond words, philosophical reflection in Zen. The dog is more than an animal. He is the mirror, the one who stays, the one who watches, the one who does not ask to be included, but includes himself through unwavering presence. We often believe that practice is posture, robes, chants, discipline, but the dog shows another path, the path of stillness, humility, and patience. He did not seek entry, he embodied it, as the koan says. A monk asked Master Jiaozhou, "Does a dog have Buddha nature or not?" Jiaozhou answered, "Mu. Mu nothingness, no thing. The empty gate. The dog at the gate becomes the gate. He teaches without doctrine and disappears without clinging." Psychological reflection attachment often drives us to seek validation. We want to be seen, recognized, included. But true healing begins when we learn to sit with ourselves without approval, without invitation, without a need to cross thresholds that do not open. The dog symbolizes the quiet endurance of trauma survivors, those who remain on the threshold of belonging, who observe life from a distance, not from weakness, but from a kind of watchful wisdom. With time, presence becomes power, patience becomes proof, and silence becomes sanctuary. The inner child, who waited outside, is not broken. She is practicing, waiting, to be seen by the self. Closing meditation tonight. Imagine a gate, wooden, weathered, quiet. Outside it sits a dog, steady.com, not waiting to be let in, just being. Now ask yourself, what part of me still sits at the edge? What part have I not welcomed home? Repeat softly, I am here, even when I wait outside. I belong, even before I enter. As the Buddha taught, all beings have Buddha nature. It is only obscured by delusion and fear. Let the gate disappear. The dog become the master, and let presence become your only practice. Story 16. When the rain kept falling, it began with rain, soft at first, just a hush on the temple roof, like the breath of a sleeping world, but by evening it was no longer gentle. It fell in sheets, sweeping sideways, drumming against stone. Paths, flooding the garden pond until the koi disappeared beneath murky ripples. Wind bent the bamboos, and the bell in the meditation hall swung wildly, never struck by hand, yet ringing deep into the bones. The monks of Sianji Temple moved quietly through the storm. They patched leaks, fastened windows, covered scrolls. They did not speak of disaster. Zen teaches no attachment to conditions, and weather is as much a teacher as stillness. But one monk could not accept it. His name was Toma. He was young, no more than 25, with eyes too sharp for surrender. He had arrived 3 years earlier, a man escaping the world's violence, carrying the silence of a battlefield in his throat. He had shaved his head, memorized sutras, fasted, swept, bowed. He had followed every instruction, and still the storm inside him had not passed. Now the external world had caught up. Now, finally, something mirrored the way he felt. He stood in the doorway of the meditation hall, watching the rain blur the mountains. "It won't stop," he muttered. Beside him, the head monk, Master Guinan, folded his hands into his sleeves. Toma turned to him. "It's been days. We can't dry our robes. The firewood is damp. No one sleeps. And still it rains." Guinan said nothing. Toma's voice rose. "Aren't you going to say something? Aren't you going to ask the heavens to stop?" The master turned to him and replied gently, "Let it fall." Toma stared. "That's it, yes. But the roof will collapse. The path will flood. What if it never ends?" Guinan looked into the rain. "Then we learn to walk in water." That night, Toma did not meditate. He sat in his room. Knees pulled the chest. The sound of rain like drums in his ears. He remembered another time like this, the night he lost his brother in war. The rain had fallen then too, soaking the ground red. He had screamed to the sky. No one answered. The rain just fell. He had buried the memory beneath robes, chanting, silence. But now the rain had pulled it up again. He left his room and wandered out to the stone path. Mud clung to his feet. His robe was soaked in seconds. He stood in the center of the garden, raised his face to the sky, and shouted, "I did everything right. I sat, I bowed, I gave up everything." The rain answered with more rain. He clenched his fists. "What do you want from me?" From the shadows of the veranda, Guinan stepped into the open. He walked slowly, steadily, until he stood beside Toma. The master didn't raise his voice. He only said, "What if the rain is not asking anything of you?" Toma turned, teeth clenched. Then, "Why does it hurt so much?" Guinan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because you are still trying to stay dry." They stood in silence. Rain fell on both, eventually. Toma dropped his head. "I thought if I came here, I would be washed clean." "You have been," Guinan said. "Then why do I still ache?" "Because being clean doesn't mean being empty. It means being whole." Toma's breath hitched. "I miss him. I know. I don't want to forget him." "Then don't." "But it hurts." Guinan nodded. "Let it." The next morning, the rain continued. But something had changed. Toma walked slowly through the mud, barefoot robes tucked. He fetched firewood without complaint. He sat on the damp stone steps and watched water flow through the garden like veins. Through the earth, when asked if he was cold, he said, yes. When asked if he was afraid, he said, sometimes. When asked if he was suffering, he said, no more than the sky. Weeks later, the rain stopped. The sky cleared as suddenly. As it had darkened, light poured across the temple roof. The koi surfaced again, glinting orange and gold in the stillness. Toma stood by the pond, soaked to the knees in silence. Guinan came to stand beside him. You did not ask for the rain to end, he said. Toma smiled faintly. No, he replied. I just stopped waiting. Janae nodded. Then the storm has passed. Toma looked up, not outside, inside. Philosophical Reflections does not resist the rain, it bows to it. Suffering like a storm is not wrong. It is part of the weather of being alive. The desire to control, to stop the rain, to silence grief, to make meaning of every cloud is itself a form of suffering. True liberation does not come from ending the storm. It comes from not fearing to get. Wet Tama's transformation was not an answer. It was an opening, as Dogen Zenji wrote. Enlightenment is intimacy with all things. Even rain, even grief, even memory. Psychological reflection from a therapeutic perspective. Tama's journey reflects a shift from resistance to acceptance. In trauma recovery, we often try to suppress or bypass painful emotion, but the more we resist our inner weather, the more it persists. Acceptance and commitment therapy teaches us to make room for uncomfortable experiences without needing them to go away. The rain becomes tolerable, not because it ends, but because we stop fighting it. Emotional resilience is not immunity to pain, it is intimacy with it. To say, I feel this, I see this, I remain, that is healing. Closing meditation tonight, as you lie in bed. Listen, maybe it is raining outside. Maybe it is only raining inside you. Either way, ask, where am I still trying to stay dry? What would happen if I let the rain touch me? Repeat. Softly, I do not need the storm to pass. I only need to stop running. Let the rain fall. Let it speak. Let it cleanse. As the Buddha said, just as rain falls equally on the just and the unjust. Let your love be like the rain. Now breathe. Let the storm inside you soften, not because it is over, but because you are no longer afraid. Story 17. The monk who gave away his shadow. Asterisk, asterisk. There was once a monk who could not bear his own shadow. His name was Nari, and he lived at the temple of deep pines, a monastery surrounded by towering trees, whose needles whispered through the night. Like old ghosts, he had arrived at the temple when he was barely 20, carrying nothing but silence and a body that flinched at sudden sounds. He bowed deeper than the others. He studied harder. He walked more quietly. He believed that if he could be pure enough, perfect enough, still enough, the darkness would leave him. But every time the sun rose, there it was his shadow, long in the morning, sharp at noon, faint at dusk. It followed him, no matter how fast he walked, how cleanly he chanted, how often he bowed. Even in Zazen, when his body was perfectly still and the world around him breathed in quiet, he could feel it behind him, stretching across the floor like a stain. He hated it, because it reminded him of who he had been, before the robes, before the silence, before the temple. It reminded him of the boy who once stole from his own father, the young man who betrayed a friend, the person who lied to survive, who failed to protect, who held too much anger and too little courage. All of that he had buried beneath rituals and robes. But the shadow remembered. The shadow never forgot. One afternoon, as he swept the western corridor, Master Rin approached him. She was the oldest monk in the temple, her voice barely louder than breath, her eyes foggy from time but always clear when they looked at you. "Nari," she said, "you've been sweeping the same spot for 10 minutes. He startled, bowed. "Apologies, Master." "My mind wandered." "Where did it go?" He hesitated. "To a place I no longer belong." Rin nodded. "Then perhaps the place still belongs to you." Nari opened his mouth to respond, but she was already gone that night. He could not sleep. Moonlight filtered through the paper walls and cast his shadow onto the floor. He turned away. It followed. He sat up. It bent with him. He whispered, "What do you want from me?" And though no voice answered, a single thought formed. "I am what you will not hold." The next morning, he did not join the others for morning chanting. Instead, he walked into the forest behind the temple. He walked until the ground softened with moss, until the light filtered in fractured beams, until he felt far enough from eyes but close enough to breath. And there, beneath an old cedar, he sat. His shadow sat with him. He did not turn away. He looked at it directly, its hunched shape, its edges, its refusal to disappear. He said aloud, "I have tried to bury you, to silence you, to shave you off like my hair. The shadow remained, but you are still here." And in that stillness, something shifted. He stopped trying to erase it. He started to listen. He remembered not to wallow, not to blame, but to witness the face of the friend he had hurt, the words he had said in anger, the nights he had spent pretending to be someone else. He did not flinch. He breathed, and in that breath he felt the shadow soften. It stretched beside him, no longer chasing, only resting. From that day forward, Nari changed. He no longer avoided the sunlight. He walked with his shadow. Sometimes he spoke to it, not out loud, not with shame, but with a kind of private reverence, as one might speak to a child who had waited too long for comfort. When others made mistakes, he did not correct them harshly. When a novice came to him trembling after losing a sacred text, he placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "What matters is not the loss, but how you carry the space it leaves." He became known not for perfection, but for patience, not for purity, but for presence. The other monks noticed. One asked him, "What changed?" He replied, "I gave away my shadow." The monk blinked. "To whom?" Nari smiled. "To the part of me that needed it most." Philosophical reflections does not ask us to erase the self. It asks us to see it clearly. We all carry shadows, memories, mistakes, versions of ourselves we wish had never been. But in turning from them, we give them power. In meeting them, we find integration. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. Carl Jung, the modern psychologist whose thought often danced with Zen, wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The monk who gave away his shadow did not discard it. He gave it a place, and in doing so, gave himself peace. Psychological reflection from a clinical perspective. Nara's journey reflects the process of shadow work, acknowledging and integrating the disowned parts of ourselves. In trauma and guilt, we often split trying to become only what is acceptable, lovable, enlightened. But the psyche does not forget. Suppressed parts become anxiety, projection, inner criticism. Healing does not come from perfection. It comes from compassion. The moment we turn toward the part we fear most and say, I see you. I will not banish you, we begin to mend. Self-forgiveness is not erasure, it is re-inclusion. Closing. Meditation tonight. Sit quietly. Let a candle cast your shadow on the wall. Do not shrink. Do not turn away. Simply look and ask, what part of me have I tried to hide? What story have I refused to hold? Then, with gentleness, say, I give you space. I give you breath. I give you back to me, as the Buddha said. To understand everything is to forgive everything. Let the shadow become not a ghost, but a guide. Let your wholeness include every shape you have ever taken. Now rest, and let the next story rise like morning sun behind you. Story 18. The Sand Garden That Changed Each Day. Asterisk, asterisk. There was a Zen temple nestled high on a windswept plateau, where the land met the sky so seamlessly that one could not tell where clouds ended and mountains began. The air was thin, and silence hung like incense over the pine trees. The temple was known not for its size, nor for any relic or statue, but for its sand garden. It was small, no larger than 10 steps across, but every monk, every pilgrim, every stranger who passed through knew of it. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, and not because it was old, though it had been there for generations. It was known because it changed. Every morning before dawn, the patterns in the sand were different. One day, concentric circles. Another day, winding rivers. Sometimes straight lines broken by stones. Sometimes wild arcs with no clear shape. No one saw who did it. No rake was ever left behind. No footprints. No signs. And so the monks began to whisper that the garden rearranged itself. One monk, young and inquisitive, was determined to solve the mystery. His name was Ray. He had come to the temple 2 years prior, seeking stillness after the collapse of a life that once glittered with plans and praise. His world had fallen in silence, no great tragedy, only a slow unraveling of meaning. The questions he once asked about success had dried into deeper questions he could not name. Ray spent his mornings sweeping the temple path and his nights sitting in meditation. Yet still he felt apart, unsettled, as though he lived always one breath behind the moment. But the garden fascinated him. Every morning he would rise before the others, slip silently into the courtyard, and gaze at the sand. It was always perfect. Not a leaf disturbed it, not a mark left behind. It was art born of silence and erased without grief. Ray decided he must learn its secret. One night he stayed awake. He took a cushion and sat near the garden under the eaves of the meditation hall. The moon was bright, but shadows moved like breath across the stone floor. He waited in stillness, determined not to blink too long, not to doze. Hours passed. Nothing came, no monk, no rake, no sound, no sound. And then, just before dawn, he saw movement, not in the garden, within it. The sand itself was shifting. No hands, no wind. Garden rearranged itself, lines forming from stillness, patterns emerging like ripples in time. It was neither slow nor fast, just inevitable. Ray could hardly breathe. He stayed frozen until morning light stretched across the sky and the garden lay complete, a spiral broken by a single diagonal slash. Through its center, he stared, not in fear, not even in wonder, but in recognition. Something inside him whispered, "This is how it is." The next morning, He approached Master Kinnan, the elder of the temple. Rei bowed. "Master," he said, "garden, it moves on its own." Kinnan looked at him, as though seeing not the student, but the space between his words. "And what does it teach you?" Rei hesitated. "That the world rearranges itself even when we do nothing." Kinnan nodded. "Yes, and that nothing remains. Yes, and that beauty does not need permanence." Kinnan smiled. "You have seen not with the eyes," he said, "but with the self." Rei continued to visit the garden each day, but now he no longer asked why it changed. He asked, "What is it showing me today?" One morning, the garden was bare, just smooth. Untouched sand, no lines, no shapes. He sat beside it for hours. When a novice passed and asked what it meant, Rei said, "Sometimes emptiness is the form." Another day, the garden was dragged in chaotic loops, lines crossing lines. The same novice frowned. "Is it a mistake?" Rei shook his head. "No, some days the mind looks like this." And once he found it covered in leaves, the wind having undone everything. The novice sighed, all the work lost. Rei smiled. Then perhaps it wasn't work, but play. Months passed. Rei no longer clung to his cushion. During meditation, he breathed more slowly, spoke less quickly, laughed when nothing was funny, and when he closed his eyes at night, patterns in his mind no longer begged for answers. They shifted, dissolved, reformed like the sand in the garden, like the self, like time, like breath. Philosophical reflection in Zen. Impermanence is not tragedy, it is truth. The sand garden that changes each day reflects the nature of the mind and the world. Form arises, form dissolves. We are not meant to cling to either. The garden does not apologize for changing, it does not mourn its past shapes. It does not resist new patterns. This is awakening, not an escape from change, but intimacy with it. As the Buddha taught all conditioned, things are impermanent. Work out your liberation with diligence. The sand is never still, but liberation is found not in freezing it, in seeing it shift, without grasping. Psychological reflection, cognitive rigidity, the desire to control, to predict, to preserve as a common root of psychological distress. We want stability, certainty, continuity, but life, like the garden, offers none of these consistently. Mindfulness practices help loosen our grip on fixed narratives. The sand garden becomes a mirror. Each day it shows us our longing, our fear, our clinging, and each day it asks, "Can you let this go? Can you let this be?" Rei's transformation is not an epiphany. It is a slow unlearning. He stops seeking permanence. He starts listening to the flow. This is the foundation of peace. Closing meditation tonight. Before you rest, imagine a garden of sand. No walls, no guards, only the gentle movement of unseen hands shaping the surface. Now ask, what pattern did today leave in me? Can I let it fade? Can I trust what forms next? Repeat softly, I am the sand, I am the pattern, I am the change. As the Buddha once said, just as a snake sheds its skin, we must shed our past over and over again. Let the garden be dot, let tomorrow shape it anew, and rest. Story 19. The room with no door asterisk. There was a monastery at the edge of a dense forest, built into the cliffs where stone met sky. Hidden behind mossy pines and veils of fog, it was the kind of place that did not appear on maps, and if it did, no one believed it. Birds passed overhead in silence. The wind changed its tone when it arrived there, and the few who made their way to the gates did so because the world outside had become too loud to bear. One day, a man came to the monastery. He was older than he looked and younger than he felt. His eyes were dim, but not from blindness. Posture bent forward as if bowed beneath invisible weight. He had no name to offer, only a sentence. I am looking for a way out. The abbot, a man named Shoku, nodded slowly. Then come in, he said, and led the traveler through the gate. For weeks, the man remained at the monastery. He did not speak much. He did not chant or study sutras. He swept. He fetched water. Sat, but he never smiled. The other monks left him alone. They had seen this before. Souls carved thin by longing, minds thick with confusion. Still, they began to wonder, what did he want to escape? No one dared ask until one evening, during walking meditation, he paused beside Abbot Shoku in the corridor and asked, "Is there a place in this temple where I can be alone?" Shoku turned to him. "There is one room. Can I go there?" The abbot nodded. "But once you enter," he said, "you may not leave." The man's brow furrowed. "Not ever. Not in the way you expect." The next morning, Shoku led him down a narrow staircase behind the main altar into a hall rarely used. At the end stood a wooden door, plain and silent. "This is the room," Shoku said. The man stepped forward. "What is inside?" "Yourself," without another word. He opened the door and entered. The abbot closed it behind him. The man turned. There was no handle on the inside. No latch, no key dot, only for plain walls, a straw mat, a single window high up near the ceiling, and silence so thick it rang in his ears. He waited at first. It was easy. He sat, he breathed, he listened, but soon the thoughts arrived. Sharp, unrelenting. "Old, why did you come here? You failed everyone. You'll never be free." He stood, paced the room, knocked on the door. "Nothing," he shouted. No answer. He threw his cup at the wall. It shattered. Still, silence. Hours passed, or days. He lost track. The light changed, but gave no clues. He tried to sleep, but the silence beneath his skin would not let him rest. Finally, he collapsed on the mat, tears mixing with dust. "I thought I wanted to escape," he whispered, "but I brought the cage with me." And there, on the floor, something broke open. Not a sound, not a realization, but a space stopped between thoughts. A breath that didn't carry the usual weight. A softness. He sat up, closed his eyes, and didn't try to leave. Time moved strangely. He sat in stillness. Sometimes thoughts came, but he no longer chased or fled them. He let them pass, like birds across an empty sky. Sometimes sorrow visited. He bowed to it. Sometimes laughter bubbled up for no reason at all. He let it be, and one day he couldn't say when. It happened. He no longer needed a door, because he was no longer trying to run. Later, the abbot opened the door. The man sat quietly, eyes open, calm. "You are free to go, Shoku," said Dot. The man stood, bowed, and stepped into the corridor. It felt no different than the room, and yet everything had changed. He remained at the monastery for years, not because he was trapped, but because he had discovered space. Not outside, inside, when new seekers arrived. Full of questions and unrest, they would sometimes ask him, "How do I escape the pain?" He would smile and reply, "I went into a room with no door, and I found out the exit was never outside." Philosophical reflection Zen does not offer escape. It offers intimacy. The room with no door is the self-plane, unadorned, inescapable. We spend our lives trying to run from fear, shame, memory, loss. We seek doors in other people, in success, in distractions. But the teachings are clear. There is no way out. Only in, only through. As the ancient Zen master Ikkyu once said, no one can enter the great gate of enlightenment until they have sat down alone with their own mind. The room holds nothing, and in that nothing, everything becomes visible. Psychological reflection and therapy. The room with no door is the space of deep internal work. We reach it when distraction no longer numbs. When old strategies fail, when we're left with nothing but ourselves. This is often where trauma integrates, where suppressed emotion returns, where the nervous system begins to recalibrate. What was once unbearable becomes familiar, not because it is resolved, but because we have learned how to sit with it. This is the basis of mindfulness-based therapies, of internal family systems, of contemplative healing, presence, without the need for escape. Closing meditation tonight. Imagine a room, no door, no exit, only you, your breath, your silence. Now ask, what have I been trying to run from? Can I sit with it just for this moment? Repeat softly, I do not need a door. I only need space. Let your body soften. Let your mind quiet, as the Buddha once said. Better than going to heaven is going nowhere with awareness. Now rest, and let the next story find you, wherever you are. Story 20. The mirror with no reflection. Asterisk, asterisk, in the northern region of the Tohoku Mountains, where snow lingered long after winter had passed and streams ran beneath the frozen surface like hidden veins. There stood a temple made of stone and silence. It was not grand, but it was ancient, and among its treasures, no gold. No relics was a mirror. It hung in the main meditation hall, frameless, slightly tarnished, with a surface that seemed neither glass nor silver. It had been there for centuries. Pilgrims came from far villages to see it, though most left disappointed. For when they looked into it, they saw nothing, no face, no reflection, not even the glimmer of light, just depth, unmoving, unchanging. It became known as the mirror with no reflection. The monks spoke of it rarely, and only in metaphor. They said it revealed not what you are, but what you are not. They said it did not show your face because it waited for you to see your true nature. Most visitors stared at it briefly, shrugged, and walked away. But one woman stayed. Her name was Natsu. She arrived late one autumn, when the air tasted of ash and the last leaves clung like memories to the trees. She came without fanfare, wearing an old traveler's cloak and carrying a satchel, full of notes, drawings, and torn pages. A scholar, perhaps, or a seeker. She did not say. On the second day of her stay, she stood before the mirror, and she did not move. The monks observed her quietly. At meals, she was silent. In zazen, she was still. But when others returned to their rooms, she returned to the hall, staring. Some assumed she was deluded, others enlightened. But Master Ryosho, the elder of the temple, watched her with calm interest. He had seen this before. On the seventh day he approached her. She bowed. "Why do you stand here so long?" he asked. She looked at the mirror. "Because I want to know who I am." "And what have you seen?" "Nothing," she said. "And it terrifies me." Ryosho nodded. "That is a good place to begin." She looked at him, searching his face for instruction. He said nothing more, only walked away that night. She did not sleep. She sat outside her room, her notes scattered around her. Sketches of the mirror, descriptions, theories, questions. What is the self? Why do we fear emptiness? What remains when memory fades? She had studied all her life texts from India, sutras from China, treatises on consciousness and perception. But none of it prepared her for this. A surface that gave nothing back in the morning. She returned. This time she did not look for her face. She stood still, like the mirror. She let the room empty itself of effort. She breathed, and then something shifted, not in the glass, in her. She no longer waited for an answer. She simply witnessed a day's past. She ate with more ease. She smiled once when a novice dropped a teacup and exclaimed, "It leaped." She walked slowly through the garden, pausing to watch ants carry crumbs across a stone. And still, each day, she returned to the mirror, not to ask, not to demand, only to meet herself, or the absence of herself. She began to understand. One evening, Master Ryosho sat beside her in the hall. They both faced the mirror. "Do you still see nothing?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I see everything." "Explain." "I see the thoughts I cling to, the image I protect, the fear I hide behind knowledge. When I look into this mirror, all of it dissolves. And what remains is..." She paused. He waited, still. Ryosho nodded. Double quotes. "Do you know why the mirror does not reflect?" "Because it has no need to show," she said. "It only is. And do you know what that means for you?" She looked down. "I think," she said, "I have spent my life believing I was what I saw in other mirrors, and now I no longer believe." When spring arrived, Natsu prepared to leave. She bowed deeply to the monks, thanked the cook, and returned her borrowed robe. As she reached the gate, Master Ryosho handed her a small cloth-wrapped bundle. She opened it. Inside was a shard of the mirror, a piece chipped centuries ago and preserved in silence. "It will not show your face," he said. She smiled. "I know." She bowed once more and walked into the world. Philosophical reflection in Zen. The self is an illusion, not in the sense that it does not exist, but in the sense that what we cling to as I is ever shifting, reactive, unreal. The mirror with no reflection does not affirm identity. It removes it. It invites you into the space before the story of me arises, before thought, before image, just being. This is why it reflects nothing. Not because there is nothing, but because there is everything, as the Diamond Sutra says, all appearances are delusions. If you see through them, you see the Tathagata. See no face is not to lose the self. It is to see the whole sky. Psychological reflection in modern life. We seek our identity in feedback, in mirrors, screens, likes, affirmations. We measure who we are by what returns to us. This is fragile and exhausting. Natsu's journey is the process of deconstruction of therapeutic disidentification with the ego-construct. It is similar to deep meditative insight or advanced cognitive diffusion practices. Stepping back from the thought I am and resting in there is. In that resting, the nervous system calms. The drive to perform recedes, and a deeper self beyond roles emerges. Still, spacious, whole, closing meditation tonight. Before sleep, close your eyes. Imagine standing before a mirror. But when you look, nothing reflects. Do not panic. Do not search. Simply stay. Let the silence of that surface meet your breath. Ask yourself, without name, role, memory, who am I? Repeat softly, I do not need reflection to be real. As the Buddha said, within this body, 6 feet in length, lies the world. The origin of the world, the cessation of the world. Now rest, let the mirror dissolve, let the truth arise, not as image, but as presence. Story 21. The monk who burned his own scriptures. Asterisk, asterisk. In a secluded valley where the river curved like a sleeping serpent through hills of cedar and stone, there stood a modest Zen temple called Homuin, the Hall of Clear Names. It was known, not for its size or lineage, but for its library, hundreds of scrolls, handwritten by generations of monks, preserved with reverence in a cedar hall that smelled of ink and moss. The monks who lived there were quiet men, patient and disciplined, devoted to the scriptures as living teachings. They copied verses by hand, bowed before shelves, whispered sutras in candlelight. Among them, one monk stood apart not by attire or manner, but by intensity. His name was Yoren. He had come to the temple as a young man, carrying wounds too deep. For speech, he rarely smiled, never asked questions, but when handed a brush, he moved with impossible grace. Within months, his calligraphy adorned the walls. His scrolls were praised across monasteries. His hands trembled only when he touched paper. He memorized the Lotus Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra. He wrote them again and again, not as ritual, but as pursuit. If I can just understand deeply enough, he thought, I will be free. His entire cell was lined with his work pages of teachings, prayers, mantras folded and stacked like fragile stairways toward truth. He rarely joined the others for walks or tea. He believed the answer was in ink, and he waited for it to appear. One autumn evening, a visiting teacher named Shon came to Homu. He was old, with eyes that saw through silence and a gait that leaned neither forward nor back. During the Dharma talk, he quoted no scripture. He told no story. He simply said, the finger that points to the moon is not the moon. Yoren's breath caught. That night, he unrolled his oldest scroll. It was perfect, elegant brushwork, every stroke refined through years of effort. He read it aloud, then whispered, is this the moon, or the finger? The next morning, Yoren walked to the abbot. I request permission to speak with Master Shon. The abbot nodded. They met in the garden, beneath a maple tree whose leaves had begun to turn. Yoren bowed deeply. I have spent 12 years writing scripture, he said. But when I heard your talk, something broke. Shon looked at him. Good, Yoren frowned, but I don't know what broke. Shon pointed to a leaf that had just fallen. Did the leaf fall because the wind was strong or because it had ripened? Yoren said nothing. Shon continued. Scripture is useful, like a boat, but if you carry the boat on your back after crossing the river, what was the point of crossing? Yoren's hands trembled. He bowed again and left that night. The monks awoke to smoke. They rushed to the courtyard to find Yoren kneeling before a stone basin, flames rising from a small pile of paper. He was feeding his scrolls into the fire one. By one, the wind carried ashes across the garden. The abbot approached. What are you doing? Yoren looked up. I have carried the words as if they were truth, but now I see if they were only pointing. I want to see what remains when I stop reading. The abbot was silent. Then he said, when the Buddha left his palace, he burned no scrolls. But when he awakened, he returned and taught without clinging. Yurin nodded. I do not burn out of anger, he said, but to see with empty hands. The abbot placed a hand on his shoulder. Then let the fire be your next scripture. In the days that followed, Yurin stopped writing. He stopped reciting. He walked. He swept. He sat by the river and watched light bend through water. He no longer asked for answers. He watched ants carry grain. He felt rain soak his robe. And one morning, while sitting under a tree, he looked at a curled brown leaf and whispered, "This is enough." Years later, a young monk found Yurin in the garden. He asked, "Do you miss your scrolls?" Yurin smiled. "Sometimes, but only the sound of the brush, not the weight of knowing." The monk bowed. "But how do you study now?" "I study with the wind," Yurin said, "with my spine, with the way a child laughs in the village below. But don't you need words?" Yurin turned to him. "When you are thirsty," he said, "do you drink the label on the cup?" Philosophical reflection in Zen. The map is never the territory. Scripture is sacred, but only as a guide. Clinging to it is like clutching the raft long after crossing the river. At some point, the teachings must dissolve into lived experience. Yurin's act was not rejection, was release. He saw that words are pointers, not destinations. As the Zen master Huangbo taught, do not mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. The fire became his teacher, not because it had raised, but because it cleared the way. Psychological reflection. Modern seekers often cling to knowledge as a shield, books, systems, philosophies. But healing is not accumulation, it is embodiment in therapy. Clients may over-intellectualize pain, mistaking understanding for integration. True transformation begins when we drop into presence, when we feel rather than explain, when we trust silence as deeply as insight. Yurin's shift reflects a maturation of awareness from cognition to being, from knowing to knowing that knowing is not enough. Closing meditation. Sit quietly. Imagine holding a scroll. Years of effort. Words you believed would save you now. Gently place it down. Ask what remains when I stop reading? Can I trust this breath? Repeat softly. I release the words and listen to the silence. They came from, as the Buddha said, in the scene, there is only the scene. In the herd, only the herd. Let the fire burn kindly. Let the moon rise without a name, and rest. Story 22. The Woman Who Planted Stars. Asterisk, asterisk. On a quiet hill where the rice fields curved like sleeping bodies, and the night fell quickly without sound, there lived a woman named Sumi. She was neither a monk nor a teacher, nor even known to pray out loud. But for many years, long after the village fires had died and the doors were locked for sleep, Sumi could be seen walking the fields beneath the moon alone, barefoot, and carrying a small pouch of something she never named. Children whispered that she was planting stars. The elders, more skeptical, said she had lost someone long ago and walked to find them in the dark. No one ever asked her directly. There was something about her silence that discouraged questions, not out of fear, but reverence. Sumi had once been a wife, then a mother. Then neither. Her husband died in a landslide that took half the western ridge. Her son died 3 winters later of an illness that arrived in the night and never explained itself. After that, she no longer wept. She no longer spoke of grief. She began walking every night, same path, same quiet. She carried a satchel stitched from her husband's robe, worn soft from years of use. Inside it, villagers believed, were seeds, though none ever saw her drop a single one. There were no flowers where she walked, no sprouts, no change, only footprints and stillness. One spring, a young novice from a temple in the south came to the village. His name was Kai, and he had been sent to study silence, not from books or chants, but from the lives of those who lived closer to the earth. His teacher had said, "Go find someone who does not speak but still teaches." He found Sumi. He watched her for several nights, always at a distance, sitting on a stone as she walked her quiet circuit under the stars. She never varied her pace. She did not pause. But there was something in the rhythm of her movement, the way she held her hands, the way she turned toward the sky every so often as if listening for a voice older than language. On the sixth night, he approached. She did not stop walking. He bowed and began walking beside her. For many minutes, neither spoke. Then Kai said, "I was told you plant stars." Sumi said nothing. Kai continued, "But I see no light in the soil." Still no answer, only the sound of their feet brushing dry grass. Finally, Kai asked, "What are you planting?" Sumi stopped, turned to him slowly, then opened her satchel. Inside were small slips of paper, dozens of them, worn thin by years, edges curled. Each bore a name, written in careful calligraphy. Some faded, others fresh. Some names common, others foreign. Some single characters, others long as poems. She reached in and handed one to Kai. He read it, Ko, "A name," she said, softly, "My son." It was the first word she had spoken to another in years. Kai looked at her, eyes wide. "You bury these?" She nodded. He asked, "Why?" And she answered, "So the night remembers." They resumed walking. Now he noticed every few steps. She knelt, not dramatically, not with ritual, only with presence. She would lift a stone, press the slip of paper beneath it, then lower the stone again. No prayer, no bow, just care, Kai asked. "Do you believe this brings them back?" "No," she said. "Then what does it do?" She paused, considering, then replied, "It returns the name to the earth, so it does not remain trapped inside me." He walked with her every night after that. He brought names, to the name of his sister, who had died in childbirth, the name of his teacher's teacher, whom he never met but whose books he copied, the name of a friend he had hurt and never apologized to. He wrote them carefully, folded them, and buried them, stone by midsummer. Others joined a potter whose wife no longer recognized his face, a young girl whose mother left and never returned, a hunter who had shot a crane by accident and wept for days. Each brought names, no ceremony, only paper and presence. The hill became a quiet constellation of memories pressed beneath stone. No one spoke of it during the day, but each night, footsteps padded across the grass, hands pressed names into soil. The stars above watched and, perhaps, something softened below. One night, Kai asked Sumi, "Do you ever run out of names?" She smiled. "Never. There are always names waiting to be released." Kai asked, "What happens after we've planted them all?" She turned to him. "Then we plant our own." In autumn, Sumi fell ill. The village healer said it was the kind of illness that arrives with age and silence. She was given a warm bed near the window every night. Someone took her path for her dot. Kai walked it first, then the others. She smiled when they returned, footprints in their robes. On the night of the first frost, she called Kai to her side. "Have you written yours yet?" she asked. He lowered his gaze. "No." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a slip, handed it to him. It bore no name, only space. He understood. She whispered, "You are not the name." But still, it longs to be placed down. That night, she passed, her breath as quiet as her footsteps once were. The next evening, the villagers walked the path as always. Kai placed a single blank slip beneath a stone. No name, no sound, just presence, years. Later, the village path was covered with moss. The stones, weathered by rain, shifted slightly each year, but the hill glowed at night, not with candles, not with spirits, but with the quiet presence of those who had learned to plant what no longer needed to be carried. The stars above were unchanged, but the ones below, softly in paper, and love continued to shine. Philosophical, Reflection Zen does not teach that we must forget. It teaches us to carry without clinging, to honor what has passed, without letting it harden the present. Sumi's ritual was not superstition, it was surrender, a practice of release. To name what lives in us, gently place it down, and trust the earth to hold it. The stars she planted were not celestial. They were remembrances of sorrow, of love, of release, as Dogen wrote. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things. And to forget the self does not mean to lose. It means to plant it back into the ground, where it can grow again as something else. Psychological reflections, Sumi's act mirrors. A therapeutic ritual of symbolic release, naming and externalizing grief through writing. Burying, or ritual, is a known and effective method of grief processing. When we speak our sorrow, or write it, or release it into nature, we reframe our relationship to it. It doesn't disappear, but it changes form. And in that shift, we make space. The act of writing names and burying them under stones is an act of non-verbal integration, a way for the psyche to say, "I remember, and I also release." Healing is not about erasing, it is about making room to walk again. Closing meditation tonight, write a name on a slip of paper. Could be someone you've lost, someone you've hurt, someone you've never dared to forgive. Or it could be your own. Hold it in your palm and ask, "Can I place this down not to forget, but to be free?" Repeat softly, "I plant this name in peace. I carry it no longer." As the Buddha said, just as a candle cannot burn without fire, we cannot live without. Releasing, now rest. Let the stars return to the earth. Let your heart become a sky wide enough to hold all names and release them. Story 23. The Path That Was Never Walked. Asterisk, asterisk. There was a forest, deep and old, where the trees leaned so close together that daylight arrived only in fragments. The villagers called it Yaminamorith, the forest of shadows, not because it was evil, but because it held what had not yet been seen. No one went in. There was no trail, no torii gate, no shrine, no sacred sign to mark the entrance. But old woodcutters told tales of a narrow path, hidden beneath the brambles, visible only when the wind moved the ferns in a certain way. They said those who found it would see where they were meant to go, but most never looked, or looked once and turned away, until one day a monk named Saigon arrived. He had been traveling for many seasons, his sandals worn thin, his robes patched with threadbare cloth. He had studied with masters in the south, sat beneath waterfalls in the north, and spent 3 winters in silence atop Mount Chikuma. but something in him still stirred a quiet ache, a sense that he had followed many paths, but never his own one. Morning, he awoke with a thought he could not ignore. The teachings have brought me far, but now I must walk where no one has walked. And so, he came to Yami-no-Mori. The villagers warned him. There is no trail, one said. It's easy to get lost, another whispered, but Saigon only bowed and replied, perhaps I need to be. He entered at dawn. The forest swallowed him in silence. He walked with no map, no direction, only a feeling. Beneath his feet, moss softened each step. Above, the canopy tangled the light. Hours passed, then days. He ate berries, drank from creeks, slept curled against roots. He did not search for a way through. He let the forest shape his pace. Sometimes he circled back to the same grove. Sometimes he walked without knowing why. One afternoon, he came to a clearing. There was nothing extraordinary about it, just a ring of grass, a stump at the center, and a sense of stillness that made him pause. He sat on the stump and waited, not for insight, not for vision, only for the next. Days passed. Still he sat. He watched spiders repair their webs. He watched mushrooms grow after rain. He watched his thoughts appear and dissolve like mist in sun. No revelation came, but something inside him began to unwind. The need to arrive, the need to understand, the need to justify the journey. All of it softened. He no longer wanted to leave the forest, not because he feared the world, but because he no longer needed it to tell him who he was. On the 13th day, he opened his eyes and saw something strange. A path, narrow, delicate, winding away from the clearing like a thread woven through trees. It had not been there before, or perhaps it had, and he had only now become quiet enough to see it. He stood, walked toward it, and with each step, the forest changed not dramatically, but subtly. The light grew warmer, the air lighter, and the silence deeper, not in emptiness, but in fullness, as if the forest had exhaled. He followed the path for hours. Then, without warning, it ended, not at a village, not at a temple, but at a large, smooth stone with words etched in moss. This path was never walked in till you walked it. He stood there for a long time, then bowed and turned around. There was no trail behind him, no footprints, only forest, only presence. He left the woods. A week later, the villagers stared. You were gone for nearly a month, they said. Did you find the hidden path? He smiled. I found the path only when I stopped looking. They frowned. Where did it lead? Here, he said. But through me, years passed. Saigon returned to the monastery. He taught no formal doctrines, quoted no sutras. He asked each student one question. What path are you avoiding because no one has walked it? When they answered, I don't know, he would smile. Then that's the one. Philosophical reflection. In Zen, the path is not inherited. It is discovered, not through maps, but through experience. Not by walking behind, but by walking into the unknown. The path that has not yet been walked, is your life the part of it you've not yet allowed yourself to live? We often cling to tradition, lineage, structure, not out of reverence, but fear. But Zen points us toward direct experience, toward what arises when we surrender certainty, as the Zen master Yonmen said, walk on, exactly where your foot meets the ground. Psychological reflection. We are conditioned to follow paths that are visible, proven, affirmed by others. But personal growth often demands a divergence, to step into unfamiliar patterns, to question roles, to say, I do not know where I'm going, but I trust what I feel. This is not recklessness. It is deep trust in intuition. In psychology, this aligns with individuation, Carl Jung's idea that one must differentiate from collective identity to become whole. Sagan's journey through the forest is symbolic. He does not find the path. He becomes it, not by conquering, but by listening, by waiting, by daring to see what no one has yet seen. Closing meditation tonight. Close your eyes. Imagine a forest. Dark. UNMAPPED. You stand at its edge. Now ask yourself, what part of me have I avoided exploring because no one else has? What truth waits for me not in books, not in rituals, but in the quiet that I alone must enter? Repeat softly. I do not need a path to begin. I become the path by walking. As the Buddha once said, there is no path to the truth. The truth is the path. Now breathe. Step in, not to arrive, but to become. Story 24. The teacup that sang before I tea broke. Asterisk. In a small mountain hamlet where the mists drifted through pine-like forgotten breath, there lived an old potter named Haru. His home stood at the end of a mossy path, past terraced rice paddies and crows that called out names no one remembered. He lived alone, surrounded by shelves of bowls, cups, and vases, some complete, some cracked, some merely fragments held in place by time and dust. Haru was not famous. His pottery was rarely sold. He had no apprentices, no students, but monks from distant temples still visited, each hoping for one of his teacups, said to be unlike any others, quiet in form, yet somehow full of sound. They spoke of one cup in particular, a small, irregular vessel with a chip along the rim and a single line of gold running down its side. They called it the singing teacup, because on certain mornings, when tea was poured gently into it, the cup would hum a low, soft tone that seemed to rise not from the clay but from somewhere beneath it. It wasn't a song, not in the usual sense, just a vibration, a presence, and once it broke, but not in silence. That winter had been long. The cold arrived early, settling into bones and rafters, making even the fire seem distant. Haru was older now. His hands no longer shaped clay the way they used to. Some mornings, he simply sat, cup in hand, steam rising into stillness. He would hold the singing cup like a memory. Close, but not clung to. He did not try to make it sing. Some days it did. Some days it didn't. That was enough then. One morning, as the snow fell without sound, he poured the last of his roasted tea into the cup, and it hummed so faintly he barely heard it. But the vibration went through him, as if the cup had touched the grief he carried in his ribs. He lifted it, and as he brought it to his lips, the cup cracked, not violently, just a soft, brittle sound, a breath splitting open. The tea spilled into his lap, the cup fell to the floor, and shattered. Haru did not move. He sat, watched the steam rise from his robe, watched the broken pieces glint on the floor, and whispered, "Thank you." Days passed. He did not sweep the shards. He let them rest where they fell, like ash from a completed fire. When villagers visited, they noticed, "Why do you keep the broken pieces?" One asked. Har. You only smiled, because they are still singing. They did not understand, but they did not ask again. Later that month, a young monk from the southern province came to Haru's home. He had heard of the cup, of the sound, legend. He hoped to see it, to hear it, to understand. He found only broken clay. He stared. This was it. Haru nodded. It's gone, the monk said, clearly disappointed. No, Haru replied. It completed its song, but it's broken. Haru picked up a fragment, held it to the light. Everything breaks, he said, but not everything sings. The monk stayed the night. He watched as Haru poured tea into a different cup, silent, plain, no sound. But as Haru sipped, he closed his eyes, and his face softened in a way that required no music. The monk asked, "How did it sing?" Haru answered, "Because I listened." The monk asked, "Why did it break?" "Because its time came, and you aren't sad." Haru looked into his tea. I was, but then I remembered its song came from within me too. The next morning, the monk prepared to leave. Haru handed him a simple clay cup, rough at the base, uneven at the rim. "It won't sing," he said. The monk bowed, receiving it with both hands. "But you might," Haru added. Years later, that monk would become a teacher. He would tell students not just of silence and breath, but of a teacup, a cup that hummed once, that sang when held gently, that broke not in tragedy, but in release. And he would end his story with a question. What within you must be allowed to sing even if it will break? Philosophical reflection in Zen. Impermanence is not only accepted, is cherished. The beauty of the teacup was not in its form, but in the way it revealed sound before it could no longer hold shape. Just as falling leaves are not failures of the tree, but completions. To sing before breaking is to live without withholding, to know that every breath may be the last, and still to offer it fully. This is practice, as the poet Ikik once wrote. Break the mirror in your room, the light of your original face will shine. Psychological reflection. The singing cup reflects the fragility and strength of presence. In trauma and perfectionism, we often fear breaking. We hold ourselves rigid, unexpressed, safe but silent. But healing invites us to vulnerability, to sing not, despite the crack. But through it, Haru did not grieve the cup's end, because he had already received its gift. Psychologically, this mirrors the principle of transient joy, the beauty of a moment held lightly, without clinging. When we can allow presence to move through us, without needing to preserve or replicate it, we begin to live, to risk being fully seen, to risk singing. Closing meditation tonight. Sit quietly, hold an empty cup, not to drink, just to feel. Now ask, what part of me has waited too long to sing? What truth trembles in the silence? Now repeat softly, I will sing before I break, and even after, my silence will echo. As the Buddha taught, with the relinquishing of grasping comes the unbinding of the heart. Now breathe. Let the song begin, not with sound, but with space. Story 25. The sound that ends all stories. Asterisk, asterisk, there was once a temple built at the edge of the sea, where land surrendered to water without resistance. The waves touched the stones of the outer courtyard, and on nights of high tide, salt gathered in delicate rings around the wooden stilts of the meditation hall. This temple had no name. Or, perhaps, it had too many. The monks who lived there did not chant loudly. They whispered. They did not ring bells to call attention. They waited for the wind to carry what it needed to say. But each evening, without fail, they gathered in a circle, in the sand just after dusk, to sit together in silence. And in the center of the circle was an old, round drummed surface stretched with time-worn leather, faded with age, shaped by the hands of those long gone. No one played it, not often, only when the story ended, and no one ever knew when that would be. The temple's most senior monk, an old man named Shunyo, was known for his patience. He had once been a traveling poet, his verses praised in distant courts. But one day, he stopped writing. He gave away his scrolls, left the city, and walked, until he found this temple by the sea. When asked why, he would say, "Because I mistook sound for song." He never explained further. Each night, Shunyo sat with the others around the drum. The waves whispered behind them. The stars slowly turned above, and one by one, the monks would tell a story not to teach, not to impress, but to release. A story of sorrow, a story of beauty, a story of not knowing. But the rule was clear. No story could be forced. And once a story truly ended, if the silence that followed was full and clear and unresisting, then someone would reach out, tap the drum. Once, just once. That sound marked the closing. The moment the story no longer needed to be told again. Some monks lived years without hearing their story end. Some never spoke at all. One summer, a young woman named Nari came to the temple. She was not a nun. She was not anything. Really, when she arrived, only breath and skin and an expression in her eyes. That said, she had forgotten how to live without flinching. She did not ask to join the temple. She simply stayed nearby, helping in the garden, washing bowls, watching the sea. The monks did not turn her away. One evening, as the circle formed, she sat at its edge. She listened for weeks. Then one night, she spoke. "I don't know if this is a story," she said, "but once, I loved someone who could only love me when I was small." The circle was still. She continued. "I learned to shrink, to soften my voice, to fold my hunger, to step around shadows." Her voice did not shake. "I left," she said, "but I brought him with me. Inside, every time I breathe, I hear him reminding me to be less." The silence that followed was long, but not complete. The drum remained. Untouched, she returned the next night, and the next, each time. She offered a little more, a memory, a moment, a breath she had forgotten to exhale years ago. The monks said nothing, but each one, in their own way, leaned a little closer. One evening, as she spoke, her voice cracked. But she didn't turn away. She said, "I think I believed if I could explain it enough, it wouldn't hurt." Then she looked at the drum, but did not move. Not yet. The seasons changed. Salt air turned cool. The trees by the path began to curl their leaves. And one night, Nari sat in the circle and said, nothing. She did not tell a story. She did not whisper a word. She simply breathed. The sea rolled against the sand. The fire crackled low. The sky shimmered, half moon casting soft light on her face. Then, slowly, she reached out her hand, touched the drum, and she tapped it once. The sound echoed deep, clear. Final dot. The monks closed their eyes. Shunyo bowed his head. No one spoke. There was no need. The story had ended, not because it had been resolved, but because it no longer needed to be carried. The next morning, Nari walked to the edge of the water. Shunyo joined her, she asked. "Why only one strike?" He answered, "Because one sound is enough when nothing more must be said." She nodded. "Will I forget the story?" "No," he said. "But now it will rest behind you, not beneath you." She closed her eyes. The waves reached forward, kissed her feet, and retreated. She exhaled, not to release anything, just to breathe. Years later, Shunyo passed. The temple held no funeral, only a night of silence. Then, when dawn broke, the youngest monk walked to the circle. He told no story. He simply bowed and struck the drum. Once the sound rang out over the sea and vanished. Philosophical reflections and teaches that all stories are provisional. They arise, they serve, they dissolve, clinging to a story whether of pain, identity, or achievement limits our ability to meet the present. The drum is not a ceremony. It is a marker of release. A way to say, this story shaped me, and now I am ready to shape without it. As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax, right now, and rest. To strike the drum is not to forget. It is to remember differently, with space, with peace. Psychological reflection in therapeutic practice. Stories are central to meaning-making. We tell them to organize chaos, to validate pain, to affirm identity. But healing deepens when the story no longer defines us. When we can say, that happened, and I am still here. The sound that ends the story is not silenced, is integration. A felt sense that the narrative no longer owns our breath, that the wound no longer writes our future. This is not denial, it is maturity of memory, the transformation from victim to witness, from echo to presence. Closing meditation tonight. Sit in stillness. Place your hand on your chest. Feel your heartbeat. Now ask, what story have I told, again and again, not for healing but from habit? Can I let it be complete? Not erased, but set down. Repeat softly. The story shaped me, but I do not need to carry it. Now imagine a drum before you. Breathe, and when you are ready, strike it once in your mind. Let the sound end the story, and begin the silence that holds all stories yet to be lived. As the Buddha said, when the mind is silent, the whole universe surrenders. Now rest, your journey continues, but the burden does not. This was the 25th story. Thank you for walking the path with me. Thank you for sailing with us on this journey of stillness and reflection. If these 25 Zen stories touched something quiet within you, they offered a pause, a breath, a reminder that you are already enough, then this small boat has done its part. Now, we invite you to be part of the circle. Leave us a comment. What story lingered in your heart? What line opened something in you? We'd love to hear your reflections. Your presence shapes this space more than you know. If the stories brought you calm, insight, or even gentle tears, consider sharing this video with someone who may need it too. You never know what one quiet story can offer to a noisy heart. And if you'd like to keep walking with us slowly, sincerely, please subscribe to The Empty Boat. There are more stories drifting this way. Until then, breathe gently, walk softly, and carry nothing you no longer need. See you in the next silence.